Hi there, get comfortable. If this video is part of your bedtime routine, like and subscribe. Drop your location below. Story 1. At exactly 11:42 p.m., the night clerk at the Riverside Motel in the quiet town of Ashbridge received a phone call that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The clerk's name was Daniel Price. He had been working the late shift for nearly 6 years. Nothing ever happened in Ashbridge after dark. The motel mostly served tired truck drivers and travelers passing through the state highway. The phone ringing that night felt strange. Daniel glanced at the caller ID. Room 309. He picked up the phone. Front desk, how can I help you? For a moment, there was only silence. Then came the sound of heavy breathing. Daniel frowned. Hello? Room 309. A woman's voice finally spoke. Soft. Trembling. Please help me. Daniel sat upright. What's wrong? More breathing. Then something else. A dull thud. Like something heavy hitting the floor. Daniel's stomach tightened. Are you okay? The woman whispered again. He said he'd come back. Daniel's mind started racing. Who? Who's coming back? For a second, the line went quiet again. Then the woman said something that would later become one of the most chilling lines ever recorded in the Ashbridge police files. If the phone goes dead, it means he's here. Then the line went silent. But it didn't disconnect. For almost 2 full minutes, Daniel sat frozen, listening to nothing but the faint sound of the motel room's television playing in the background. And then, click! The call ended. Daniel stared at the phone. Something felt terribly wrong. Very wrong. So he grabbed the master key and started walking toward room 309. The Riverside Motel hallway was quiet. Too quiet. The flickering lights buzzed softly above him as he approached the door. Room 309. The television inside was still playing. He could hear it through the door, but there was no other sound. Daniel knocked. Front desk. Is everything okay? No answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. His hand trembled as he used the master key. The door slowly opened, and what he saw inside would trigger one of the most disturbing investigations the town of Ashbridge had ever seen. The room was empty. Completely empty. The bed was perfectly made. The lights were off except for the glow of the television, but the phone on the nightstand was off the hook. Daniel stepped inside. Hello? No answer. Then he noticed something. The bathroom door. It was slightly open, and beneath it, he saw something dark spreading across the tile floor. At first, his brain refused to process what it was. Then he realized. Blood. A thin red line slowly crawling across the white tile. Daniel staggered backward and ran to the phone at the front desk. When the police arrived 10 minutes later, they forced open the bathroom door. Inside, they found the body of a woman. She had been stabbed 16 times. But the most terrifying detail was something the coroner would discover later. The woman had been dead for nearly 30 minutes before Daniel ever received the phone call. Which meant only one thing. The person who called the front desk was not the victim, and whoever it was, they had been standing in room 309 with the body, listening, waiting, watching. But that was only the beginning, because by the next morning, the investigation would uncover something even darker. The woman in room 309 didn't exist. No ID. No luggage. No car. No name. No one had checked into the room. No one had seen her arrive. And the motel security cameras had captured something that detectives would later describe as the most disturbing footage we've ever seen. Footage that showed a man entering room 309 at 11:10 p.m., but never leaving. Yet when police searched the room, there was no man inside, only the dead woman. And the phone, still quietly hanging off the hook, waiting for the next call. Detective Mark Calder had been working homicide cases for nearly 18 years. He had seen bodies in alleys. He had seen murder scenes that made seasoned officers walk outside just to breathe. But the moment he stepped into room 309 at the Riverside Motel, something about the case felt wrong. Not just disturbing. Wrong. The kind of wrong that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The crime scene was too clean. Too quiet. Too arranged. The victim lay in the bathroom, her body partially turned on its side against the cold tile floor. Blood had spread beneath her like a dark shadow. 16 stab wounds. But the strange thing was the lack of struggle. No broken furniture. No shattered glass. No overturned lamps. It looked almost as if the woman had been attacked suddenly, silently, and quickly. Calder crouched beside the bathroom doorway while the forensic team worked. "Anything?" he asked. Forensic technician Laura Bennett shook her head. "No ID. No wallet. No purse." She lifted a small evidence bag. "Just this." Inside the bag was a cheap motel keycard. "Room 309. That's it?" Calder asked. "That's it." Calder frowned. "People don't check into motels without luggage." Laura nodded. "Exactly." The phone call. Meanwhile, another detective sat in the motel's small security office with the night clerk, Daniel Price. Detective Luis Ortega played the recorded phone call again. The motel's phone system automatically archived calls for billing purposes. The recording crackled through the speakers. Daniel's voice first. "Front desk, how can I help you?" Then silence. Then the woman's whisper, "Please help me." Ortega leaned closer to the speakers. The recording continued. He said he'd come back." Then the chilling line. "If the phone goes dead, it means he's here." Then the thud. Then breathing. Then the click. The room stayed silent after the recording ended. Daniel swallowed hard. "I swear that's exactly how it happened." Ortega nodded slowly. "I believe you." But something in the audio bothered him. He rewound the tape. Played it again. Then again. Finally he paused it. "There." Daniel looked confused. "What?" Ortega pointed at the speakers. That sound behind her voice. They listened carefully. Faint. Barely noticeable. But it was there. Footsteps. Heavy ones. Walking slowly across the motel room. And then, a door creaking open. Ortega leaned back in his chair. Someone else was in that room during the call. Daniel felt his stomach twist. "But when I opened the door..." "No one was there," Ortega finished. The security cameras. Down the hall, Detective Calder was reviewing the motel surveillance footage. The Riverside Motel had only 3 cameras. One at the parking lot, one at the front office, and one covering the second-floor hallway where room 309 was located. The footage from that night started at 10:30 p.m. At first, nothing happened. A couple walked down the hallway. A man with a duffel bag entered room 214. Normal motel activity. Then at 11:10 p.m., something changed. A man appeared on the screen. Calder paused the video. The man wore a dark hoodie, jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He walked slowly down the hallway toward room 309. Calder zoomed in. The man stopped outside the door. Knocked twice. Then the door opened. But the camera angle didn't show who opened it. The man stepped inside. The door closed behind him. Calder checked the timestamp. 11:10 p.m. He fast-forwarded the footage. 10 minutes passed. 20 minutes. 30 minutes. No one came out. The hallway remained empty. Then at 11:44 p.m., Daniel the clerk appeared on screen. Walking toward the door. Using the master key. Entering the room. Calder leaned back in his chair slowly. "That's impossible," he muttered. "Because the man who entered at 11:10 p.m. never left." The problem. When Calder returned to the crime scene room, the forensic team had already finished their first sweep. "Anything useful?" he asked. Laura shook her head again. "No fingerprints except the clerk's." "What about the victim?" "No match in the database." Calder rubbed his temple. "So we have." He counted on his fingers. A dead woman with no identity. A man who entered the room but never left. And a phone call from someone who was supposedly already dead. Laura gave him a tired look. "When you say it like that..." "Yeah," Calder said quietly. "It sounds insane." The autopsy surprise. At 2:30 a.m., Calder received a call from the medical examiner. "Detective, you need to hear this." "What is it?" The examiner hesitated. "The estimated time of death." Calder leaned against the wall. "Let me guess. Around midnight." "No." A pause. "Closer to 11:15 p.m." Calder's stomach dropped. "That's 5 minutes after the man entered the room." "Yes." "And nearly half an hour before the phone call." The detective felt cold. So whoever called the front desk was standing in the room with her body, the examiner finished. The hidden detail. Later that morning, Ortega called Calder into the security room. You need to see something. He rewound the hallway footage again. The moment at 11:10 p.m. The hooded man walking toward room 309. But this time Ortega slowed the video. Frame by frame. Watch the door, Ortega said. The man knocked. The door opened. Just slightly. Then the man stepped inside. But as the door closed, Calder noticed something strange. Pause. Ortega froze the frame. Calder leaned closer. Zoom in. The image sharpened. And there it was. For less than half a second. A second face behind the door. A woman. Pale. Terrified. Her eyes wide. Looking directly at the hallway camera. That's her, Calder whispered. The victim. But Ortega shook his head slowly. Look again. Calder frowned. What do you mean? Ortega tapped the screen. The autopsy report says the victim had long black hair. Calder stared at the paused image. The woman in the doorway had short blonde hair. His chest tightened. That's not the same woman. Exactly. The room went quiet. If the woman in the doorway wasn't the victim, then who was she? And where had she gone? The final discovery. Just before sunrise, another officer entered the room. Detectives, we found something. They followed him into room 309. The officer pointed at the mattress. Forensics lifted it. Beneath the mattress was something carved into the wooden bed frame. A message. Rough. Scratched deep into the wood. 3 words. Calder leaned down and read them aloud. He is still here. The detectives slowly looked around the room. Every corner. Every shadow. Because suddenly, for the first time since the investigation began, room 309 didn't feel empty anymore. And the worst part, when they checked the hallway camera again, they noticed something that hadn't been there before. At 3:17 a.m., long after the police had sealed the room, long after everyone had left the hallway, the camera recorded the door to room 309, slowly opening, from the inside. The morning after the murder in room 309, the town of Ashbridge woke to flashing police lights outside the Riverside Motel. Word spread quickly. By sunrise, local news vans had already arrived. But inside the motel's second floor, behind yellow police tape, Detective Mark Calder stood silently in the hallway staring at the door to room 309. The image from the security camera replayed in his mind over and over. 3:17 a.m. The door had opened. Slowly. Quietly. From the inside. But the room had been empty. Every officer on scene had confirmed it. No windows were open. No back exits. No hidden crawl spaces. Nothing. Yet the camera didn't lie. Calder had learned that lesson years ago. People lied. Witnesses lied. Suspects lied. But cameras rarely did. He rubbed his eyes. The case was only 12 hours old, and already it felt like a nightmare. A missing identity. Downstairs, Detective Luis Ortega was reviewing the victim's photos with the local missing persons database. The woman found in the bathroom had no identification. No tattoos. No distinguishing scars. No fingerprints in the national system. It was as if she had never existed. Ortega leaned back in his chair. Come on, he muttered to himself. Everyone leaves a trail somewhere. He opened a second database. Driver's licenses. Then hospital records. Then employment records. Nothing. Not even a partial match. The victim was a ghost. And that bothered him more than the murder itself. Because even the most careful criminals couldn't erase someone completely. Unless they had never been documented in the first place. The motel records. Around mid-morning, Calder joined Ortega in the office. Tell me you've got something. Ortega sighed. Depends how much you like bad news. Calder folded his arms. Try me. Ortega turned the monitor toward him. Room 309 was booked online yesterday afternoon. Under what name? Ortega hesitated. Emily Carter. Calder frowned. That's not helpful. Wait. Ortega clicked the screen. The credit card used to book the room doesn't exist. Calder leaned closer. What do you mean? I mean the number belongs to no bank. Fake. Perfectly fake, Ortega said. He scrolled down further. And the phone number used for the reservation. Calder already knew the answer. Let me guess. Disconnected. Calder exhaled slowly. Someone planned this. Yeah, Ortega said. And they planned it well. The second camera. But the biggest discovery came just before noon. One of the forensic technicians entered the office carrying a laptop. You need to see this. Calder and Ortega exchanged looks. Please tell me it's good news, Calder said. Depends how you look at it. The technician plugged the laptop into the monitor. Remember the parking lot camera? Calder nodded. What about it? We enhanced the footage. The screen showed the motel parking lot at 10:58 p.m. the night before. A car pulled into the lot. A small silver sedan. The driver stepped out. A woman. Blonde. Short hair. Calder's eyes widened. Freeze that. The technician paused the frame. It was the same woman seen in the hallway doorway. The one who wasn't the victim. She checked in, Ortega said quietly. The footage continued. The woman walked toward the motel office. A few minutes later, she exited the office holding a key card. Room 309. Calder's heart pounded. Wait, he said. Play the next camera. The technician switched to the hallway footage. Timestamp 11:03 p.m. The blonde woman appeared in the hallway. She unlocked room 309. Went inside. Closed the door. Calder leaned forward. So she's the one who rented the room. Yes, the technician said. But watch this. The footage jumped ahead. 11:10 p.m. The hooded man appeared. He knocked. The door opened. And the man entered. Just like before. Calder nodded. We've already seen this. The technician shook his head slowly. You haven't seen everything. He skipped ahead again. This time to 11:16 p.m. The hallway camera remained still. No movement. No one leaving. But then something strange happened. Ortega leaned closer. Hold on. At the far end of the hallway, another woman appeared, walking toward the camera. Calder blinked. It was the same blonde woman, the one who had checked into the room. But that was impossible, because according to the footage, she had never left room 309. The impossible timeline. The detectives stared at the screen. The blonde woman walked calmly down the hallway, past the camera, toward the stairs. Timestamp 11:16 p.m. Calder looked at Ortega slowly. She left the room 6 minutes after the man entered. But we never saw her leave. Exactly. Ortega rewound the footage again. Frame by frame. There was no moment where she exited the room. Yet somehow, she was already in the hallway, walking away. Calder whispered something under his breath. What? Ortega asked. I said, this case just got worse. A chilling pattern. By afternoon, detectives ran the image of the blonde woman through facial recognition software. They expected nothing. But 20 minutes later, the computer returned a result. And when Ortega saw the file, his stomach dropped. Calder, he called. The detective walked over. What is it? Ortega turned the monitor. Her name is Lena Voss. Calder read the report. Then he frowned. That can't be right. Why not? Calder pointed at the date. She died 3 years ago. The room went silent. According to police records, Lena Voss had been murdered in a motel in Nevada. Stabbed to death. In a bathroom. Inside room 214. Calder looked up slowly. Show me the case file. Ortega opened it. The crime scene photos appeared on the screen. Bathroom floor. Blood. Tile. The same brutal pattern of stab wounds. 16. Exactly 16. Calder felt the chill run down his spine. Same killer, he whispered. But Ortega shook his head again. No. He zoomed in on the Nevada crime scene photo and pointed at the victim's face. Same woman. Calder stared, because the victim in the Nevada case looked exactly like the blonde woman from the motel footage. The woman who had just checked into room 309 last night. The final twist. Later that evening, the detectives made one more discovery. It came from a forgotten detail in the motel booking system. A second reservation, made 2 hours before the murder, for the same room, room 309, under a different name. Calder read the file, then slowly looked up. Who made the first reservation? Ortega swallowed. The victim. Calder blinked. What was her name? Ortega hesitated. then said the words that made the entire investigation take a darker turn. Emily Carter. Calder felt a knot tighten in his chest. So let me get this straight. He counted slowly. The dead woman was Emily Carter. The room was booked by Emily Carter. And 2 hours later, Ortega finished the sentence. A woman who died 3 years ago checked into the same room. Neither detective spoke for a long time, because suddenly the message carved under the bed made terrifying sense. He is still here. Not was. Not was here. Is. And if the pattern from the Nevada case repeated itself, then somewhere in Ashbridge, there was another motel room, another victim, and another phone call waiting to happen. By the time the sun set over Ashbridge, the investigation into the murder at Riverside Motel's room 309 had taken a turn that none of the detectives could explain. 2 women connected to the same room. One of them dead in the bathroom. The other supposedly dead for 3 years. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a man wearing a dark hoodie who had walked into the room and seemingly vanished from existence. Detective Mark Calder sat in the dim police station conference room staring at the evidence board. Photographs were pinned across the wall. The victim, Emily Carter. The blonde woman from the camera footage, Lena Voss. And the still frame of the hooded man entering room 309. 3 people. 1 room. 1 murder. But the timeline refused to make sense. Calder rubbed his forehead. Run the Nevada case again, he said quietly. Across the table, Detective Luis Ortega pulled the old file onto the screen. 3 years earlier, a roadside motel outside Las Vegas, Nevada. A woman found stabbed 16 times inside the bathroom of room 214. The victim's name, Lena Voss. The crime scene photos looked almost identical to the one in Ashbridge. Same tile floor. Same brutal pattern of wounds. Same horrifying stillness. But the strangest part wasn't the murder itself. It was the final line in the Nevada police report. Case closed due to lack of suspect and absence of further incidents. Ortega leaned back in his chair. That line aged poorly. Calder didn't respond. Instead, he stared at the picture of Lena Voss. Something about her expression in the surveillance footage kept bothering him. She didn't look scared. Not exactly. She looked aware, as if she knew something the detectives didn't. The call comes in. At 8:52 p.m., nearly 21 hours after the murder in room 309, Calder's phone rang. The call came from dispatch. Detective Calder, we've got something you need to hear. His stomach tightened. What kind of something? A pause. Then the dispatcher said the words that made the entire room freeze. Another motel just reported a disturbing phone call. Calder sat up straight. Where? About 12 miles outside Ashbridge. Name? Pinewood Motel Lodge. Calder grabbed his coat. Let's go. The Pinewood Motel Lodge. The Pinewood Motel Lodge sat along an empty stretch of highway surrounded by pine trees. Old neon signs flickered above the parking lot. The kind of place travelers stopped for one night and quickly forgot. But tonight, the parking lot was filled with police cars. Calder and Ortega stepped inside the lobby. Behind the counter stood a nervous young clerk. His name tag read Ryan Harlow. Ryan looked pale. His hands shook slightly. "You're the detectives?" he asked. Calder nodded. "You reported the call." Ryan swallowed hard. "Yes." Ortega leaned against the counter. "Tell us exactly what happened." Ryan took a deep breath. "It was about 20 minutes ago. I got a call from one of the rooms." "What room?" Ryan looked down at the desk. "Room 214. Calder and Ortega exchanged a look. "That number again." "Go on," Calder said. Ryan continued. "I answered the phone like usual. Front desk, how can I help you?" His voice trembled. And then, a woman whispered something. Calder felt a chill creeping up his spine. What did she say? Ryan closed his eyes briefly, then repeated the words. "Please help me." Ortega's jaw tightened. "Anything else?" Ryan nodded slowly. "She said, he told me he'd come back." Calder felt his pulse quicken. "Did she say anything else?" Ryan nodded again. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Yeah." He repeated the exact sentence. "If the phone goes dead, it means he's here." The lobby fell silent, because those were the exact same words spoken in the call from room 309. The recording. Ryan led the detectives into the small office behind the desk. I recorded the call, he said. Calder raised an eyebrow. You did? Ryan nodded. Our phone system logs calls automatically. Ortega sat down at the computer. Play it. Ryan clicked the file. The speakers crackled. Ryan's voice played first. Front desk, how can I help you? Then came the whisper, please help me. Calder's heart pounded. The audio continued. He told me he'd come back. Then the chilling line. If the phone goes dead, it means he's here. Then something else. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Walking across the motel room. And then, knock. 3 loud knocks. Calder leaned forward. Pause it. Ryan froze the audio. Calder's stomach twisted. Did you hear that? Ortega nodded slowly. That's not someone walking inside the room. What do you mean? Ryan asked. Ortega looked at him. Those footsteps are coming from the hallway. Ryan's face went pale. Because that meant something terrifying. When the woman said he's here. The man hadn't been inside the room yet. He had been standing outside the door. The race upstairs. Calder grabbed his flashlight. What time did the call end? Ryan checked the screen. 2 minutes ago. Calder's voice became sharp. Which floor? Second floor. Show us. The three of them rushed toward the staircase. Calder's mind was racing. Same phone call. Same words. Same room number as the Nevada case. If the pattern continued, they were about to find another body. The hallway lights flickered as they reached the second floor. Room 214 was at the far end. The door was closed. Calder approached slowly. He knocked once. Police. No answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. Ortega checked the door handle. Locked. Calder looked at Ryan. You have a master key. Ryan nodded nervously. He handed it over. Calder slid the card into the lock. The door clicked open. The second crime scene. The room was quiet. The television was playing softly. Just like room 309. Calder stepped inside. The bed was untouched. The air smelled faintly metallic. He turned toward the bathroom. The door was slightly open. And beneath it, a thin red line of blood was slowly spreading across the floor. Ortega cursed under his breath. Calder pushed the bathroom door open. Inside, a woman lay on the tile floor. Her body twisted unnaturally. 16 stab wounds. Exactly the same pattern. But when Calder saw her face, his blood ran cold. Because he recognized her instantly. It was the same woman from the motel camera footage. The blonde woman. Lena Voss. The woman who had already died 3 years ago. The most terrifying detail. The coroner arrived less than an hour later. After a brief examination, he delivered the same chilling report. Estimated time of death, approximately 8:25 p.m. Calder checked his watch. Ryan had received the phone call at 8:52 p.m. Nearly 30 minutes later. Just like the previous murder. Ortega spoke quietly. Same timeline. Calder nodded slowly. Same killer. But something about the room felt wrong. Too quiet. Too still. As Calder turned to leave the bathroom, he noticed something carved into the mirror above the sink. Words scratched into the glass. Fresh. Deep. 3 words. Calder read them out loud. 2 down. The detective felt the cold realization settle in his chest. Because if the message was counting victims, then the killer wasn't finished. Not even close. The second body changed everything. By midnight, both the Riverside Motel and the Pinewood Lodge were surrounded by police vehicles, flashing lights cutting through the dark rural highway like silent alarms. 2 identical murders. 2 different motels. 2 victims connected by a timeline that made absolutely no sense. Detective Mark Calder stood outside room 214 at Pinewood Lodge, staring down the dim hallway. Behind him, crime scene technicians moved quietly in and out of the room. Cameras flashed. Evidence bags rustled. But Calder barely noticed, because the message scratched into the bathroom mirror wouldn't leave his mind. 2 down. If that message was meant for them, then it meant something terrible. It meant the killer was counting. And if he was counting, then the number would eventually become 3. The second timeline. Back at the Ashbridge Police Department, Detective Luis Ortega sat at his desk replaying the second phone call again. The audio from Pinewood Lodge sounded almost identical to the one from Riverside Motel. Same terrified whisper, same chilling sentence. If the phone goes dead, it means he's here. But Ortega wasn't focused on the woman's voice anymore. He was focused on the background sounds. He slowed the recording, listened carefully. Then he leaned forward. There you are. He isolated the moment just before the knocking sound. And something new appeared. A faint noise. Almost impossible to hear unless you were listening for it. A quiet click, like the sound of a button being pressed. Ortega frowned. He rewound the tape again. Click, then footsteps. Then the knock. His heart skipped. Calder, he said under his breath. The hidden clue. 20 minutes later, Calder entered the office carrying a fresh cup of coffee. You look like you haven't blinked in an hour, he said. Ortega pointed at the screen. Listen to this. He played the recording. Calder listened silently. After the knock, he shrugged. Same as the first call. Ortega shook his head. No. He rewound the tape. Played the earlier moment. The click sound. Calder tilted his head. What is that? Ortega leaned back slowly. I think that's the sound of someone starting the call recording. Calder blinked. What? Ortega turned the computer toward him. Think about it. That sound happens before the footsteps. Before the knock. Calder's coffee sat forgotten on the desk. You're saying the person who made the call. Ortega finished the thought. Wasn't the victim. Silence filled the room. Because suddenly the horrifying possibility became clear. The woman begging for help might not have been calling the front desk at all. A terrifying realization. Calder rubbed his jaw. Let's walk through this. He grabbed a marker and moved to the evidence board. Victim dies first. He drew a line. 30 minutes later, the motel clerk receives a call. Another line. But if the victim is already dead? He turned to Ortega. Then who made the call? Ortega answered quietly. The killer. Calder stared at the board. And the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. The killer enters the room. Kills the victim. Waits. Then calls the front desk using the victim's phone. Pretends to be her. Creates a recording. Then knocks on the door to simulate his own arrival. Calder felt the cold realization settle in his chest. He's staging the entire thing. Ortega nodded. Exactly. But why? That question hung in the air like smoke. Why would a killer pretend the victim was still alive? Why create a fake emergency call? Why scare the motel staff? Unless the phone call wasn't meant for the victim. It was meant for someone else. The third voice. Ortega reopened the audio file. Listen again, he said. Calder sighed. I've heard it 10 times. Listen carefully. The recording played again. The woman's whisper, please help me. But this time Ortega increased the background volume. Suddenly something new became audible. A second voice. Very faint. Almost like someone speaking from across the room. Calder's eyes widened. Is that? Ortega nodded. Yeah. They both leaned closer to the speakers. The faint voice whispered something barely understandable. But after replaying it 5 times, the words finally became clear. Say it again. Calder's stomach dropped. The killer had been standing in the room, coaching the victim, forcing her to repeat the lines, recording her voice, turning her fear into a script. The pattern emerges. By 2 a.m., the detectives had reviewed both recordings side by side. The similarities were undeniable. Same phrases, same timing, same staged footsteps, same knock. The killer had created a routine. And routines always had a purpose. Calder stared at the map on the wall. 2 motels marked with red pins. Riverside Motel, Pinewood Lodge. He grabbed a ruler and drew a straight line between them. Both locations are along the same highway. Ortega nodded. Route 17. Calder traced the road with his finger. If the killer is following this highway. He moved the ruler further north. There's another motel about 20 miles from here. Ortega read the name. Maple Creek Inn. The room went quiet. Because if their theory was right, then the killer wasn't finished. He was traveling. The most disturbing discovery. Just before they left the station, Ortega ran one final check on the motel phone records. And what he found made his blood run cold. Calder, look at this. The detective walked over. What now? Ortega pointed at the call logs from Pinewood Lodge. The front desk received a call from room 214. Yeah, we know that. Ortega shook his head slowly. Look at the time stamp. Calder leaned closer. Then his eyes widened. The call had started at 8:48 p.m. But the phone inside room 214 hadn't been picked up until 8:52 p.m. Calder felt his heart skip. That's impossible. Ortega whispered the only explanation. The call didn't come from the room. Calder slowly looked up, because if the call wasn't coming from room 214, then it meant something far worse. The killer had been calling the front desk from somewhere else. Somewhere outside the room. Watching. Waiting. Listening. And while the motel clerk believed he was talking to the victim, the killer had been standing somewhere nearby, smiling. The final warning. As Calder grabbed his coat to leave the station, his phone buzzed. A new message from dispatch. Detective, you need to hear this. Calder closed his eyes briefly. What now? The dispatcher hesitated. Another motel called in a report. Calder's voice turned cold. Where? Maple Creek Inn. Ortega slowly looked up from his desk. Calder didn't need to say anything, because they both already knew what the dispatcher was about to say next. There was a phone call from one of the rooms. Calder felt the dread settle in his chest. What room? The dispatcher's answer confirmed their worst fear. Room 309. When the call came in from the Maple Creek Inn, Detective Mark Calder didn't hesitate. Within minutes, he and Detective Luis Ortega were in an unmarked police car racing north along Route 17. The highway was nearly empty at that hour. Only the occasional truck roared past in the opposite direction, headlights slicing through the darkness. Calder gripped the steering wheel tightly. Tell me everything dispatch said, he asked. Ortega checked the notes on his phone. Motel clerk reported a phone call from room 309 at 1:14 a.m. Calder's jaw tightened. Same number. Same words too. Calder glanced over. You're kidding. Ortega shook his head. Nope. He read from the report. Female voice asked for help. Said a man was coming back. Then said. Calder finished the sentence for him. If the phone goes dead, it means he's here. Ortega nodded slowly. Exactly. The car sped faster. Because this time, the detectives weren't arriving after the murder. They were arriving during the pattern. And if they were lucky, they might stop it. The third motel. The Maple Creek Inn appeared 20 minutes later, its old wooden sign creaking in the wind. It was even smaller than the previous motels. 2 floors. A dozen rooms. A quiet roadside stop surrounded by dark woods. But tonight the parking lot lights were blazing. A nervous motel clerk waited outside the lobby door. When Calder and Ortega stepped out of the car, the clerk rushed toward them. You're the detectives, right? Calder nodded. You called about the phone call. Yes. What's your name? Sarah Kim. Sarah looked like she hadn't slept in hours. Her hands trembled slightly. Ortega asked the question both detectives were thinking. Did anyone come out of room 309 after the call? Sarah shook her head. No. Calder felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Is the room occupied? Yes. Name? Sarah checked the reservation book. David Rayner. Calder frowned. A man? Sarah nodded. He checked in around midnight. Ortega and Calder exchanged a glance. That was new. Until now, the victims had been women. Calder turned back to Sarah. Did he seem nervous? Suspicious? No, she said. He seemed normal. Ortega sighed quietly. That's what they always say. The walk upstairs. The hallway lights buzzed faintly as they climbed the stairs. Room 309 sat at the end of the corridor, the same number as the first crime scene. Calder slowed his pace. Listen. The hallway was silent. No movement. No voices. But something felt wrong. Too quiet. Ortega knocked on the door. Police. No answer. He knocked again. Mr. Rayner, open the door. Still nothing. Calder looked at Sarah. You have a master key. She handed it over nervously. Calder slid the keycard into the lock. The door clicked open. The detectives drew their flashlights and stepped inside. The unexpected scene. The room lights were on. The television played softly in the background. A man sat on the edge of the bed. Alive. Completely unharmed. He looked up, confused. Can I help you? Calder froze. Ortega lowered his flashlight. Are you David Rayner? The man nodded slowly. Yes. Calder scanned the room quickly. No blood. No signs of struggle. No body in the bathroom. Nothing. Ortega asked the obvious question. Did you call the front desk? David frowned. No. Calder pointed toward the nightstand. The call came from this room. David shook his head. I never touched the phone. Ortega moved toward the bathroom. He pushed the door open. Empty. Spotless. No blood. No victim. For the first time since the investigation began. The pattern had broken. A strange detail. Calder turned back to David. When did you check in? About midnight. Have you left the room since then? No. Has anyone come to the door? David hesitated. Well, actually. Calder's attention sharpened. What? About 15 minutes ago, someone knocked. Ortega leaned forward. Did you open the door? David shook his head. No. Why not? I looked through the peephole. Calder felt his pulse quicken. And? David swallowed. There was no one there. The detectives exchanged a look, because they had heard that detail before. The hidden camera. While Ortega continued questioning David, Calder inspected the room more carefully. Everything seemed normal, until he reached the phone. He lifted the receiver. The dial tone hummed softly, but something about the phone looked different. He flipped it over, and his stomach dropped. Taped to the underside of the phone was a tiny recording device. Calder called out quietly, Ortega. The detective walked over. What is it? Calder held up the device. Ortega's eyes widened. Is that? A recorder, Calder said. He carefully removed it from the phone. The device was still blinking. Still recording. Calder pressed the playback button. The room filled with a familiar voice. Please help me. It was the same line from the previous calls. But this time the audio was clear. Too clear. Because the voice didn't belong to the dead victims. Ortega recognized it instantly. That's the voice from both recordings. Calder nodded slowly, which meant something terrifying. The killer hadn't forced the victims to say the lines. He had been using a recording all along. The realization. Calder replayed the audio again. Please help me. The same frightened whisper, but now it sounded different. Not terrified. Not desperate. Almost practiced. Ortega spoke quietly. That's the same voice every time. Calder nodded. Exactly. He looked toward the door. The killer never needed the victims to talk. He already had the recording. Ortega felt the pieces clicking into place, which means the voice in the phone calls. Calder finished the thought. Belongs to the first victim. The one whose voice had been captured, used again and again, turned into a tool, a horrifying signature. The final shock, as the detectives stood there processing the discovery. David suddenly spoke from behind them. Wait. They both turned. What? Calder asked. David looked confused. I recognize that voice. Calder's heart skipped. You do? David nodded slowly. I heard it earlier tonight. The room went silent. Ortega asked carefully. When? David pointed toward the hallway. Outside my door. Calder felt the air leave his lungs. What exactly did you hear? David repeated the sentence. The same one that had started everything. The same chilling whisper that had echoed through 3 motels now. Please help me. Calder and Ortega slowly looked toward the door. Because if David had heard that voice outside the room, then it meant the killer had been standing in the hallway. Listening. Watching. Waiting. And worst of all, he might still be there. The camera footage. Minutes later, the detectives rushed downstairs to review the motel's security cameras. The footage from the hallway appeared on screen. Timestamp, 1:09 a.m. A man walked into view. Dark hoodie. Baseball cap. The same figure seen at the Riverside Motel. He stopped outside room 309. Placed something under the phone. Then knocked once. 3 seconds later, he walked calmly back down the hallway. Calder leaned closer to the screen. Pause. The image froze. For the first time, the man's face was partially visible beneath the cap. Ortega whispered quietly, "Enhance it." The technician zoomed in. The face became clearer, and the moment the image sharpened, Calder felt a wave of disbelief wash over him, because he recognized the man instantly, not from the investigation, but from somewhere else. Somewhere much closer. The man in the footage was wearing a police badge. The security footage from the Maple Creek Inn froze on the computer screen. The hooded man stood in the hallway outside room 309. His face was still partially hidden beneath the brim of a baseball cap. But one detail was impossible to ignore. The metal badge clipped to his belt. Detective Luis Ortega stared at the image in silence. "Tell me I'm seeing that wrong." Detective Mark Calder didn't answer, because he was staring at the badge too. It wasn't just a random badge. It looked exactly like a police badge. The motel clerk, Sarah Kim, stood nervously beside them. "What does that mean?" she asked. Calder finally spoke. "It means the man who planted that recorder." He paused. "Might be a cop." Back to the station. By the time Calder and Ortega returned to the Ashbridge Police Department, it was nearly 3:30 a.m. The building was mostly empty. Only a few patrol officers and the night dispatcher were still working. Calder carried the printed still frame from the motel camera in his hand. The image of the hooded man stared back at him. "Let's not jump to conclusions," Ortega said quietly. Calder sighed. "I'm trying not to. Badges are easy to buy online." "Yeah. But..." Calder looked at the picture again. "That badge holder, that's department issue." Ortega's stomach tightened. Because if Calder was right, then the killer might not just be pretending to be a cop. He might actually be one. The evidence room. They headed straight to the digital forensics lab. Technician Amy Collins looked up from her desk as they entered. "You guys look like you saw a ghost." Calder placed the image on the table. "Enhance this." Amy studied the photo. "Where's this from?" "Maple Creek Inn." She frowned. "That's tonight's case." "Yeah." Amy began working on the image. Within seconds, the screen displayed a clearer version of the hooded man. Still blurry, but better. Ortega leaned closer. "Zoom the badge." Amy enlarged the section near the man's belt. The badge became clearer. A circular metal shield. The department insignia visible in the center. Amy's fingers froze above the keyboard. "That's not just any badge." Calder already knew what she was going to say. "That's ours." The list. 30 minutes later, Calder sat in the conference room staring at a list of names. Every sworn officer in the Ashbridge Police Department. 42 people. Patrol officers. Detectives. Supervisors. Someone on that list might be a serial killer. Ortega leaned against the table. "Let's think about this logically." Calder rubbed his eyes. "Please do." "The killer knows police procedures." "Yeah. He knows response times." "Uh-huh. And he knows how investigations work." Calder looked at him. "You're describing half the department." Ortega sighed. "Exactly. The old case." Amy suddenly entered the room carrying another file. "You might want to see this." Calder looked up. "What is it?" I pulled up the Nevada case. She placed a printed report on the table. The one involving Lena Voss. Ortega skimmed the first page. "Yeah, we've already seen this." Amy pointed to the last section of the report. "Not this part." Calder read it carefully, then slowly leaned back in his chair. "What?" Ortega asked. Calder slid the file toward him. Ortega read the line aloud. "Consulting investigator, Detective Nathan Keller." The room went quiet, because Nathan Keller was currently sitting 3 offices down the hall. Detective Keller. Nathan Keller had joined the Ashbridge Police Department 4 years ago. He transferred from Nevada. At the time, the department had welcomed him enthusiastically. He came with experience, a clean record, and glowing recommendations. Calder stood slowly. "You remember Keller working the Riverside scene yesterday?" Ortega nodded. "Yeah. And Pinewood too." "Right." Calder grabbed the motel photo again. "Which means he's been at every crime scene." Ortega's voice dropped. "And he'd know exactly what evidence we have." Calder looked toward the hallway. "Where is he right now?" Ortega checked his phone. His shift ended 2 hours ago. Calder felt a cold wave of realization, and nobody's heard from him since. The office. The detectives walked quietly down the hallway. Nathan Keller's office door was closed. Calder knocked. No answer. He tried the handle. Unlocked. The room was empty, but something felt wrong. The desk lamp was still on. A coffee cup sat half full beside a stack of files, as if Keller had left in a hurry. Ortega opened a drawer. Inside were several motel brochures, from towns along Route 17. Calder's stomach tightened, just like the pattern. Ortega flipped through them. Riverside Motel, Pinewood Lodge, Maple Creek Inn, and then one more, a fourth motel, further north, Lakeview Lodge. Calder pointed at it. That's next. The hidden locker. Amy suddenly called from the hallway. You guys need to see this. They followed her to the evidence storage area. I was reviewing Keller's department locker, she said. Why? Ortega asked. Amy held up a small device in an evidence bag. Because I found this inside. Calder recognized it instantly. A tiny audio recorder, exactly like the one found under the motel phone. Ortega felt his chest tighten. That's the same model. Amy nodded. And there's more. She placed another bag on the table. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Calder opened it carefully. It was a printed list. 3 names. 3 victims. Emily Carter, Lena Voss, and a third name. One they hadn't seen before. Calder read it aloud. Julia Bennett. Ortega looked up quickly. That's not one of our victims. Calder pointed at the bottom of the page. There was a time written beside the name. 4 a.m. Ortega checked his watch. It was 3:47 a.m. Calder's voice turned urgent. Find out where she is. Amy typed quickly. After a moment she froze. Oh no. What? Calder asked. Amy turned the screen. Julia Bennett checked into a motel tonight. Calder already knew what she was about to say next. Which one? Amy whispered the answer. Lakeview Lodge. The race begins. Calder grabbed his coat. Call every patrol unit. Ortega was already moving toward the door. Tell them to head to Lakeview Lodge. Amy looked worried. What about Keller? Calder paused at the hallway exit, then said the words neither of them wanted to hear. If he's following the pattern. He checked the time again. 3:51 a.m. Then is already there. The final image. As they rushed toward the parking lot, Amy called after them. Wait. Calder turned. What? Amy held up her laptop. I enhanced the hallway footage even more. She rotated the screen toward them. The hooded man's face was clearer now. Clear enough to confirm the truth. Detective Nathan Keller, standing calmly in the hallway, planting the recording device. Before walking away, Calder felt the weight of the situation settle heavily in his chest. A serial killer, a police officer, and a victim whose murder was scheduled in less than 10 minutes. Calder turned toward Ortega. Let's move. Because somewhere up the highway, room 309 was waiting again. And this time, they might finally catch the killer inside it. The sirens screamed through the quiet darkness of Route 17. Detective Mark Calder pushed the police car faster than he should have. The speedometer needle climbed past 90 miles per hour as trees blurred past on both sides of the road. Detective Luis Ortega held the radio tightly. Dispatch, confirm the victim's name again. The radio crackled. Victim is Julia Bennett, age 27. Checked into Lakeview Lodge at approximately 2:41 a.m. Calder tightened his grip on the wheel. What room? Ortega already knew the answer, but hearing it again still made his stomach sink. Room 309. The pattern is complete. 3 motels, 3 identical rooms, 3 victims, and 1 killer who had been planning every step. Calder spoke through clenched teeth. If Keller is following the exact pattern. Ortega nodded grimly, then is already inside the room. Calder glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 3:56 a.m. 4 minutes until the time written on Keller's list. 4 minutes until the next murder. Lakeview Lodge. The Lakeview Lodge appeared at the edge of a dark lake surrounded by pine trees. The motel sign flickered weakly in the night air. 2 patrol cars were already parked outside. Officers stood near the entrance, weapons drawn. Calder and Ortega jumped out of their car before it even fully stopped. Which room? Calder demanded. One officer pointed toward the second floor. 309, end of the hall. Calder looked at the staircase, then at the clock on his watch. 3:58 a.m. 2 minutes. The silent hallway. The second floor hallway felt eerily familiar. Dim lights. Buzzing fluorescent bulbs. Closed motel doors. Room 309 stood at the far end. The same number that had appeared again and again in the investigation. Calder motioned for the officers to stay back. He and Ortega approached quietly. Calder pressed his ear against the door. At first, nothing. Then, a faint sound. A woman's voice. Soft. Terrified. Please help me. Calder's heart slammed in his chest. Ortega whispered. That's the recording. Calder shook his head slowly. No. He listened again. This time he heard something different. The voice sounded real. Shaking. Not rehearsed. Not recorded. This was happening right now. Inside the room. Calder kicked the door open. The detectives rushed inside. The television flickered on the wall. The bed was untouched, but the bathroom door was closed. From behind it came the sound of someone crying, and a man's voice. Calder recognized it instantly. Detective Nathan Keller. Say the line, Keller said calmly. The woman sobbed. I can't. Keller's voice turned colder. Say it. Calder stepped forward and kicked the bathroom door open. Police. Drop the weapon. The killer revealed. Nathan Keller stood beside the sink holding a knife. The terrified woman, Julia Bennett, sat on the bathroom floor. Her hands were tied. Her eyes were wide with fear. Keller slowly turned toward the detectives. For a moment, no one moved. Then Keller smiled. You're early. Ortega raised his gun. Drop the knife. Keller tilted his head slightly. I was hoping you'd arrive sooner or later. Calder stared at him in disbelief. You planned this? Keller shrugged. Of course. Julia Bennett sobbed quietly behind him. Please, help me. Calder kept his gun steady. It's over, Keller. But Keller laughed softly. No. He gestured toward the phone on the sink. You're actually right on time. The recording. Calder noticed something strange. A small recorder sat beside the motel phone. Its red light was blinking. Recording. Keller followed Calder's gaze. Oh, that. He smiled again. That's the best part. Ortega's voice hardened. You're under arrest. But Keller ignored him. Instead, he pressed a button on the recorder. The room filled with the now familiar whisper. Please help me. Calder felt a chill. Keller looked almost proud. Perfect, isn't it? Ortega stepped closer. Why are you doing this? Keller's expression changed. For the first time, the cam smile disappeared. His eyes became darker. Calder, you want the truth? Calder said quietly, yes. Keller looked down at Julia Bennett, then back at the detectives. It started 3 years ago. The first murder. Keller leaned against the sink. In Nevada. Calder already knew where this was going. Lena Voss. Keller nodded slowly. She wasn't supposed to die. Julia looked up at him in horror. What? Keller sighed. She was part of a trafficking ring we were investigating. Ortega frowned. What does that have to do with this? Keller looked irritated. Everything. He continued. She was our only witness. The only person who could identify the people running the operation. Calder listened carefully. But the case collapsed. Keller's voice hardened. Because someone leaked her identity. Ortega whispered. And she was killed. Keller nodded. In a motel bathroom. The same scene. The same violence. The same number of stab wounds. Keller looked at the detectives with quiet rage. And no one cared. The obsession. Calder slowly understood. So you started recreating it. Keller nodded. Yes. Why? Because I wanted people to pay attention. Ortega shook his head. You murdered innocent people. Keller's smile returned. They weren't innocent. Calder frowned. What do you mean? Keller gestured toward Julia. She works for one of the companies connected to the trafficking network. Julia shook her head desperately. That's not true. Keller ignored her. They're all connected somehow. Calder spoke carefully. Even if that were true, you're still a killer. Keller shrugged. Maybe. He glanced at the recorder again. But now the story will finally be heard. The sudden move. Without warning, Keller grabbed Julia and pulled her up. The knife pressed against her throat. The officers outside the room tensed. Don't! Ortega shouted. Keller backed toward the door. You're not stopping this. Calder's voice stayed calm. You don't have to do this. Keller smiled again. Oh, I do. He pointed toward the recorder. Because this is the final episode. Calder felt the tension building. Keller! But Keller interrupted. The police chased the killer through the motel. He laughed quietly. Great ending, right? The shot. Everything happened in seconds. Keller moved toward the hallway. Julia struggled. The knife slipped slightly. That was the moment Calder needed. He fired once. The gunshot echoed through the motel corridor. Keller staggered. The knife fell. Julia collapsed to the floor. Officers rushed forward and tackled Keller. Within seconds, the killer was pinned to the ground. His hands cuffed behind his back. The end of the pattern. Calder helped Julia to her feet. You're safe now. She nodded weakly. Meanwhile, Keller lay on the floor laughing softly. Ortega looked down at him. It's over. Keller shook his head slowly. No. He looked toward the recorder again. The red light was still blinking. Still recording. Keller smiled one last time. Now the story is complete. Calder turned the recorder off. And for the first time since the investigation began, Room 309 finally fell silent. The hallway outside Room 309 at Lakeview Lodge smelled faintly of gunpowder. The echo of the gunshot had faded, but the tension remained thick in the air. Detective Mark Calder stood near the bathroom doorway while officers secured Nathan Keller on the floor. The killer looked strangely calm, even with blood slowly soaking through his shoulder where the bullet had struck him. Detective Luis Ortega finished tightening the handcuffs. It's over, he said. Keller only smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not a defeated one. It was the kind of smile that made Calder's skin crawl. You really think so? Keller asked quietly. Ortega ignored him. Get him downstairs, he ordered the officers. 2 patrolmen lifted Keller to his feet. But before they pulled him out of the room, Keller turned his head toward Calder. You should listen to the recording. Calder said nothing. Keller's smile widened slightly. Trust me, he said. You're going to want to hear the ending. Then the officers dragged him out into the hallway. The recorder. A few minutes later, the motel room had quieted. Paramedics checked Julia Bennett for injuries while crime scene technicians began photographing the scene. The small recording device still sat on the bathroom counter. The red light had stopped blinking. Detective Ortega carefully placed it into an evidence bag. Let's see what he recorded, he said. Calder nodded. Play it. Ortega connected the device to his laptop. The audio file appeared on screen. One recording. Timestamp, 3:57 a.m. Exactly 3 minutes before the detectives had kicked down the door. Ortega clicked play. The speakers crackled softly. Then the familiar whisper filled the room. Please help me. Julia Bennett looked up from the bed, her eyes widening. That's the line he made me say. Calder nodded. Keller had been trying to recreate the exact moment from the previous murders. The recording continued. Julia's voice trembled. He told me he'd come back. Ortega glanced at Calder. Same script. Then the line came. If the phone goes dead, it means he's here. But this time, something changed. Instead of the usual knock on the door, there was another voice. The second voice. The detectives leaned closer to the speakers. The voice was male. Low. Calm. But it wasn't Keller's voice. Ortega frowned. Who's that? The voice spoke again. Clearer this time. Good. Now say it again. Julia's eyes widened. That's not him. Calder felt a chill run down his spine. Play it again. Ortega replayed the moment. The same unfamiliar voice repeated the command. Say it again. Calder slowly turned toward Julia. Did you hear anyone else in the room? She shook her head quickly. No. Are you sure? Yes. Her voice trembled. He was the only one there. Ortega looked back at the recording, because the audio clearly contained 2 male voices. One was Keller. The other. was someone else. The missing moment. Ortega scrubbed through the audio timeline. Wait. He pointed at the waveform. Look at this. Calder leaned closer. Between two sections of the recording, there was a small gap, about 3 seconds long. Ortega played the section again. The audio jumped suddenly, like a piece had been cut out. Editing? Calder asked. Ortega shook his head slowly. No. He enlarged the waveform. This wasn't edited. Then what? Ortega whispered the only explanation he could think of. The recorder stopped. Calder frowned. Why would it stop? Ortega shrugged. Maybe the battery shifted. Calder wasn't convinced. Or maybe. He didn't finish the sentence, because a darker possibility had just entered his mind. Maybe someone had turned it off. Keller's interrogation. An hour later, Nathan Keller sat inside an interrogation room at the Ashbridge Police Department. His shoulder had been bandaged, but the bullet wound hadn't slowed him down much. Detective Calder sat across from him. Ortega stood near the wall. The recorder sat on the table between them. Calder pressed the play button again. The second male voice filled the room. Good. Now say it again. Calder paused the recording. Who is that? Keller looked at the device, then back at Calder. I thought you'd ask that. Answer the question. Keller leaned back in his chair. You won't believe me. Calder's voice stayed calm. Try me. Keller smiled faintly. That's the voice of the man who trained me. The room went silent. Ortega stepped forward. What are you talking about? Keller tilted his head. You think I came up with all this on my own? Calder's eyes narrowed. Are you saying someone helped you? Keller nodded slowly. Of course. The hidden partner. Calder felt the tension in the room shift. Who? Keller chuckled softly. You're asking the wrong question. Ortega slammed his hand on the table. Then what's the right question? Keller leaned forward slightly. You should be asking. He paused. Why the recorder stopped. Calder stared at him. What happened during those 3 seconds? Keller's smile returned. That's when he realized something. Calder's patience was wearing thin. What? Keller looked directly into his eyes. That you were coming. The terrifying implication. Ortega's voice dropped. You're lying. Keller shrugged. Am I? Calder pressed the recorder again. The audio continued past the missing section. This time Keller's voice was clearly heard. Good. Perfect. Then Julia crying. Then the sound of the door being kicked open. The detectives stared at the timeline. Those missing 3 seconds were the only unexplained part. Calder looked back at Keller. If you had a partner. He paused. Where is he now? Keller smiled again. That's the fun part. Ortega felt his stomach twist. What do you mean? Keller glanced toward the observation window behind Calder. You're probably standing closer to him than you think. The chilling discovery. A technician suddenly knocked on the interrogation room door. Detective Calder, we need you. Calder stepped outside. What is it? The technician looked pale. It's the motel security footage from Lakeview Lodge. What about it? We reviewed it again. Calder felt a cold knot form in his chest. And? The technician turned the monitor toward him. The hallway camera showed Keller entering room 309 earlier that night. But something new had been discovered. Calder leaned closer. Zoom in. The video slowed. Keller knocked on the door. Julia opened it. Keller stepped inside. But just before the door closed, another shadow moved across the hallway wall. Calder's blood ran cold. Because someone else had been standing just outside the camera's view, watching the door, waiting. And when the detectives enhanced the image further, they saw something even worse. A reflection. In the glass of the fire extinguisher case. A man standing in the hallway, wearing a police uniform. But it wasn't Keller. Calder stared at the reflection in disbelief. Because he recognized the face immediately. It was someone from inside the department. Someone who had been helping them on the case since the beginning. Detective Mark Calder felt the room spin as he stared at the monitor. The reflection in the fire extinguisher glass wasn't Keller. It was Detective Jason Myers, one of the department's most trusted investigators. Calder blinked. No, it can't be, he whispered. Ortega's hand went to his gun, but Calder raised a finger. Not yet. We need proof. Across the hallway, Amy Collins, the forensic technician, was enhancing the footage on her laptop. The reflection is clear, she said quietly. That's definitely Maya's. Look at the jawline, the ears, everything matches. Calder rubbed his temples. Maya's had been part of the investigation from the beginning, helping track Keller's movements, giving tips, and even suggesting patrol routes to follow the killer. And all the while, he had been the one feeding him information. The plan unravels. Back in the interrogation room, Nathan Keller remained oblivious to the new discovery. He lounged in his chair, shoulders still bleeding from the gunshot, smirking. "You're staring at the wrong person," he said, noticing Calder and Ortega's tension. "What do you mean?" Calder snapped. Keller leaned forward. "My friend outside is making sure my plan runs smoothly. Think of it as insurance." Ortega's jaw tightened. "Insurance for what? You've already killed 3 people." Keller shrugged. "Perfection takes time. And someone like him, he ensures nothing goes wrong." Calder's mind raced. If Myers had been assisting Keller, that meant every move they thought they had made, every stakeout, every call, they had been monitored. Every plan Calder and Ortega made could have been anticipated. Calder whispered to Ortega. "He's been in the department all along, covering Keller's tracks. He probably has keys, access to all the files, and knows how we think." Ortega swallowed hard. That means he could still be anywhere, maybe even in this building. Confronting Myers, Calder and Ortega moved quickly. They split up. Ortega would guard the stairwell exit while Calder approached the hallway where the reflection was spotted. The lights flickered slightly in the corridor, casting long shadows. Calder's heart pounded. Every step echoed ominously. He spotted Myers standing near the evidence lockers, pretending to review a file. His posture was casual, but Calder's gut screamed danger. "Detective Myers," Calder called out calmly. "Step away from the lockers." Myers froze for a fraction of a second, then turned with a forced smile. "Detective Calder. Busy night, isn't it?" "You've been helping Keller," Calder said, steadying his voice. "We know it. The recordings, the motel calls, the reflection in the Lakeview hallway, all of it points to you." Myers' smile faltered, then hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about." Calder slowly moved closer. "Don't play games. We have video proof, timestamps, and witness accounts. You've been orchestrating this entire chain, keeping Keller steps ahead of us." Ortega emerged from the stairwell, gun drawn. "Don't make a move, Myers." Myers laughed softly. "You think you're clever, but you're still in my world. You've been following breadcrumbs I left intentionally." The confession. Calder gestured toward the evidence bag holding the motel recorder. "Tell us whose voice is on the recording." Myers' eyes flicked to the device. Then, for the first time, his mask of composure cracked. "Fine," he said, voice low. "Yes, that's me." Ortega's eyes widened. "You recorded Julia's voice." Myers shrugged. "And the others? Lena Voss, Emily Carter. Every line you've heard, that's me, coaching them, manipulating them through Keller. I made sure the recordings were perfect. Perfect fear. Perfect obedience." Calder felt bile rise in his throat. "Why? Why do this? Why kill innocent people?" Myers leaned against the locker, smiling faintly. "Innocent? They were all connected. The victims were either witnesses, accomplices, or potential leaks. Keller is artistic. He stages it. I ensure it's flawless. Together, we've created a story the world can't ignore." Ortega shook his head. "You've been using your badge, your access, and trust to kill people." "Yes," Myers said calmly. "And it worked beautifully. No one suspected me. And Keller, he thought he was in control." Calder clenched his fists. "Until tonight." Myers' smile faded. "Perhaps. But you're not fast enough. You never know where I am, what I see, what I record." The trap. Calder realized something horrifying. Myers had known about Lakeview Lodge. He had ensured Keller was in position. He had been monitoring Julia, waiting to intervene if anything went wrong. The 3-second gap in the recording, that had been Myers' doing. He could have stopped Keller if needed, or let him continue. Calder whispered to Ortega. He manipulated Keller's pattern. "All of it, from the first motel to the last." Ortega nodded grimly. "Which means, the killer's list might not be over. Calder thought back to the victims' names and the times. Julia Bennett was supposed to be the fourth. But what if there were others planned? Others recorded, coached, or trapped? Calder's eyes narrowed. We need to check every motel along the Route 17 corridor. Every room. Every recording. He could have left more. The evidence hunt. Amy Collins arrived with a laptop, showing all motel logs. We cross-referenced Keller's list with Myers' access logs. He's visited multiple motels along the highway. Every call, every recording, every placement of devices has been there. Calder exhaled slowly. So every staged call, every fake emergency, every knock, that was orchestrated by both of them. Ortega shook his head. It's worse than we thought. Myers wasn't just helping Keller. He was the voice we never expected. The man behind the recordings. Calder looked at Julia, safe for the moment, and felt a pang of guilt. We can't let this happen again. We need to stop him completely. The confrontation ends. Calder stepped closer to Myers. You're under arrest for the murders of Lena Voss, Emily Carter, and the attempted murder of Julia Bennett. Every recording, every device, every plan, it ends tonight. Myers' eyes glimmered. You'll never understand. The story was never about the victims. It was about control, about fear. Ortega pressed his gun against Myers' shoulder. Art doesn't kill people. Calder cuffed Myers' hands behind his back. You're done. There will be no more victims. No more recordings. As officers led Myers away, Calder turned to Julia. You're safe now. He can't hurt you, or anyone else. Julia's voice trembled. I can't believe this. It was all them. Calder nodded. Yes. Keller executed the murders. Myers orchestrated the recordings, manipulated him, and made sure every step went as planned. But it's over. Julia's relief was palpable, but Calder felt no joy. The horror of the past nights weighed heavily on him. 2 killers. One with blood on his hands, the other behind every sound, every whisper, every staged emergency call. A criminal mind hidden behind the badge they trusted the most. Weeks later, the department confirmed the full extent of Myers' actions. Keller confessed to his murders, providing chilling details of each staged crime scene, coached victim, and recording he'd created. Myers' manipulation was revealed as a darker layer. He had been the one supervising the entire string of events, leaving a trail of audio recordings that ensured the terror continued even when Keller was caught. The recordings that haunted the detectives, the voices that had terrorized motel clerks, witnesses, and officers, were finally catalogued, sealed, and used as evidence. Both Keller and Myers were convicted, Keller for murder, Myers for conspiracy, manipulation, and accessory to multiple murders. But the city never fully recovered from the shock. The chilling truth that a trusted officer could be the mastermind behind such horrors left a scar on the department. Motel clerks along Route 17 still recalled the voice that asked for help, a voice that wasn't always the victim's. And in quiet moments, the echo of those whispered words reminded everyone that sometimes the most terrifying evil is not in the shadows outside, but in the uniform worn by the person you trust most. Story 2. It was a misty Thursday morning when the first call came in from Blackwood Lake. The small town of Harrow's Edge had always been quiet, almost sleepy, nestled between dense forests and the glinting waters of the lake. But that morning, the calm shattered. Detective Eleanor Hart stood at the edge of the water, notebook in hand, staring at the rippling surface. The lake was eerily still now, the mist hovering low over the dark water. A faint chill clung to the air, but it wasn't the temperature that sent shivers down her spine. It was the feeling of emptiness, like someone had vanished into thin air. Deputy Marcus Riley approached, clutching a waterproof evidence bag. She was last seen here, he said. Swimming. No one saw her get out. Hart's brow furrowed. The lake isn't that big. Someone should have noticed. Riley shook his head. We've got a problem. The witnesses are all over the board. Some say they saw a figure on the dock. Others claim she was talking to someone near the trees. And then there's the footprints. Hart knelt down, examining the muddy shoreline. There were prints, yes, but they didn't lead to the water, and none led away. It was as if someone had been swallowed by the ground itself. And her belongings? Hart asked. Riley handed her a small backpack, still damp. Inside were a wallet, a cell phone, and a pair of sunglasses. Everything else, clothes, shoes, even her towel, gone. Hart's eyes swept the lake. The mist had thickened now, curling over the surface like a ghostly veil. She felt the familiar tension settle in her chest. Blackwood Lake wasn't just another missing person case. It was going to be different. Because someone didn't just vanish. Someone wanted them to think she did. The vanishing at Blackwood Lake would become the first in a series of disappearances that would grip Harrow's edge and unravel secrets that no one in the town could have imagined. The morning mist over Blackwood Lake had barely lifted when the second report came in. Another disappearance. Detective Eleanor Hart sat in her patrol car at the marina, gripping her coffee like a lifeline. The first disappearance, Samantha Reed, had been chilling, but the second one had a new, sinister pattern. This time, it wasn't a swimmer who vanished. It was a boat. A small motorboat, rented by Thomas Wilkes, a local fisherman, had gone out at dawn and never returned. Hart's partner, Deputy Marcus Riley, handed her the rental forms. It was a routine outing. No unusual behavior reported. He called the marina to confirm his departure time. Then, nothing. Hart studied the forms carefully. No safety check-ins? No distress calls? Nothing, Riley said grimly. His phone pinged near the northern edge of the lake for about 10 minutes, then went dead. Hart's stomach twisted. The northern edge of Blackwood Lake was notoriously treacherous, dense fog, jagged rocks beneath the surface, and trees that dipped into the water. Many locals avoided it, saying the lake had a shadow side. She stared at the map of the lake, tracing the dotted line of the GPS ping with her finger. It stopped abruptly at Cedar Point, a craggy outcrop surrounded by fog. Hart exhaled. Something, or someone, intercepted him there. Riley frowned. Intercepted. Hart nodded. And whoever it was, knew exactly what they were doing. Cedar Point. By mid-morning, Hart and Riley arrived at Cedar Point in a small motorized search boat. The fog hugged the lake's surface, making the water appear endless and gray. The docks were empty, abandoned, save for a few fishing poles swaying gently. The water here was calm, but deceptive. Hart remembered the local stories. Boats had been found stranded, overturned, even damaged beyond repair, yet no one was ever hurt. Not until now. As they scanned the shoreline, Hart's eyes caught something unusual. A trail of scuffed mud and grass leading from the dock into the trees. "Look at this," she called to Riley, pointing. Riley grabbed his flashlight and followed the trail. "These prints, they are too big for Wilkes. And look, broken twigs. Something, or someone, was dragged through here." Hart knelt down, examining the soil. "It's fresh. Not older than an hour." Riley's brow furrowed. "So he wasn't dragged into the water?" Hart shook her head. "No. Someone wanted to make it look like he disappeared at sea. But the evidence tells a different story." The drone survey. Back at the marina, Hart called in a drone team to survey the lake. Within minutes, a bird's-eye view of Blackwood Lake appeared on the screen. The footage revealed something disturbing. The trail from Cedar Point led into a narrow inlet, half hidden by overgrown trees and brush. Within the inlet, the drone caught the glint of a boat, partially submerged, resting against a cluster of logs. Hart froze. "That's Wilkes' boat." Riley leaned in. "And no sign of him." "Not yet," Hart said. Her mind raced. If Wilkes had been taken from the boat, the perpetrator had to be nearby, possibly still on land. She tapped the screen. "Mark this area. Every inch." The drone operator zoomed in, revealing something even more sinister. Behind the partially submerged boat, near the thickest part of the trees, a small clearing showed signs of recent human activity. Footprints, scuffed earth, and what appeared to be a tarp or canvas folded and placed carefully on the ground. Hart's heart pounded. Someone staged this, and they are organized. Riley grimaced. "That's 2 disappearances in less than 24 hours. And now a boat." Hart nodded. "This isn't random. Someone's planning these events." A witness comes forward. As the investigation continued, a local hiker, Margaret Ellis, came forward. She had been walking a trail near Cedar Point when she noticed a figure dragging a man into the tree line. Hart and Riley rushed to interview her. Margaret was visibly shaken, trembling as she described what she had seen. I don't know who it was," Margaret stammered. "He wore a dark hoodie, and I couldn't see his face. But he moved, quickly. Too quickly. And Wilkes, he didn't resist. It was like he knew he couldn't fight back. Hart scribbled notes. "Did you hear anything? Voices? Anything at all?" Margaret hesitated. Just a voice. Calm. Almost instructive. I couldn't make out the words, but it wasn't shouting. It was "oh cold." Riley's jaw tightened. "Cold? That fits the pattern." Hart nodded grimly. "Whoever this is, they are methodical. They're not doing this on impulse. They are planning each disappearance carefully, choosing victims, choosing locations, leaving a trail that looks natural, like accidents or vanishings." The search continues. The team split into units, combing both the water and the forest around Cedar Point. Boats patrolled the lake while search parties moved through the dense undergrowth. Hart and Riley focused on the narrow inlet the drone had captured. The ground was treacherous. Roots twisted like snakes beneath the leaves, and the fog reduced visibility to barely 20 feet. Hart held her flashlight tightly, scanning for anything unusual. Then she saw it, a small bundle of cloth hidden beneath a fallen tree. She knelt and carefully pulled it free. Inside was Wilkes' jacket, soaked and torn. But there was no sign of him. Riley stepped closer, scanning the area. "He's here. He can't be far." Hart nodded. "And whoever took him, they want us to find the boat first." This was a setup. They continued deeper into the trees, every snap of a twig making them jump. The trail led to a small clearing, barely 10 feet wide. There, partially hidden beneath low-hanging branches, was a makeshift camp, a fire pit cold and empty, a small tent, and a collection of personal items, mostly women's clothing and a few wallets. Hart's stomach turned. This isn't just Wilkes. There are others." Riley's eyes widened. "Missing people, and they've been kept here." The realization hit Hart like a punch. The vanishings weren't random. They were part of a larger operation, with victims abducted, held, and possibly manipulated. Signs of a stranger. Hart examined the camp carefully. Footprints surrounded the tent, too numerous to count. They varied in size, some large, some small, some barefoot. Each set was deliberate, as if the perpetrator wanted the impression of multiple people moving around. She crouched near the tent flap. Inside, faint traces of blood, hair, and what appeared to be fingerprints were visible. "This isn't just a hiding spot," she said. "This is a staging area. The vanishing, the boat, it's all part of a pattern we haven't fully uncovered yet." Riley added, "And whoever is doing this, they know the area. They know how to stay hidden. We're dealing with someone methodical. Someone patient." Hart nodded, her eyes scanning the foggy tree line. The mist seemed to thicken around them, almost as if the forest itself were concealing the perpetrator. "And if we're not careful," she said quietly, "we could be walking right into their hands." The first lead. Back at the station, Hart studied the drone footage and witness statements. Something caught her eye, a fleeting image of a small figure near the camp that didn't belong to Wilkes or the search team. "Pause it there," she instructed. "Zoom in." The image revealed a man, thin, medium height, wearing a dark jacket with a hood obscuring his face. He moved deliberately, crouching behind trees, watching the searchers without making a sound. Riley leaned over her shoulder. "So he's watching us now." Hart's fingers tightened on the mouse. "Yes. And the question is, how long has he been watching? How many victims has he taken without anyone noticing?" She stared at the screen, the mist over Blackwood Lake rising in her mind like a shadowy specter. "We're dealing with a predator who plans everything, and every second we waste could be another disappearance." Riley looked at her grimly. "Then we find him. Before it's too late." Hart nodded, her jaw set. "No mistakes this time. We trace the boat, trace the camp, and follow every clue. We bring them all back. Whoever this is, they won't get away with it." And as the lake mist curled around the trees, Eleanor Hart knew this was only the beginning. The predator was patient, clever, and methodical, and the clock was ticking for the next victim. The mist over Blackwood Lake had lifted by noon, revealing a lake that seemed calm and serene, almost normal. But for Detective Eleanor Hart, there was nothing normal about the day. 2 disappearances in less than 24 hours had unsettled Harrow's Edge, and the discovery of Wilkes' camp in the dense northern woods made it clear. This predator was methodical, patient, and dangerous. Hart and Deputy Marcus Riley returned to the northern tree line, this time with a K-9 unit, a small tactical team, and search and rescue volunteers. The dense forest pressed in around them, the fog lingering between the trees like a ghostly veil. Every snapped twig and rustle of leaves made the group tense. "We need to move carefully," Hart instructed. "The first thing the predator does is watch. If he's still around, we don't want to alert him." Riley nodded, scanning the forest. "And if he's not here, what are we even walking into?" Hart's gaze swept the undergrowth. "We're walking into a trap, or a victim." The trail. The search team split into pairs, following the tracks Hart had marked from the previous day. The mud was soft, holding impressions of shoes, boots, and bare feet. Some prints were too large to belong to Wilkes. Others were smaller, lighter, suggesting younger individuals. Hart squatted to examine one of the prints. "This isn't Wilkes," she said. "These belong to a young woman." Riley knelt beside her. "Another victim? How many are we dealing with?" Hart shook her head. "We don't know yet, but the predator is clever. He stages his disappearances. Boats, lakes, camps, everything is a distraction. He doesn't just take them, he isolates them." The search dog, a German shepherd named Rex, suddenly stiffened, ears forward. He backed sharply and pulled toward a thick patch of trees. Hart and Riley followed cautiously. "Easy, Rex. Slow." As they moved closer, the trees opened up into a small clearing. At the center, Hart's stomach dropped. A young girl, no older than 16, was huddled behind a fallen log. Her clothes were muddy and torn, her hair damp and matted. She looked up with wide, terrified eyes. Hart crouched down slowly. "It's okay. We're police. You're safe now." The girl didn't move, only shaking her head slightly. She was silent, but her trembling hands told Hart everything she needed to know. She had been through hell. "First contact." Riley knelt beside Hart, speaking softly to the girl. "Hey, what's your name?" The girl's voice was barely audible. Lydia." Hart nodded, smiling gently. "Lydia, can you walk with us?" Lydia hesitated, but with careful guidance from Hart, she rose to her feet. Her legs were weak, her shoulders slumped. The detective noticed faint bruises along her wrists and arms, signs of restraint. Riley glanced at Hart. "This matches the camp. He's holding victims here. Wilkes, now Lydia, this isn't random. He's building a pattern." Hart's mind raced. The predator had abducted Samantha Reed, Thomas Wilkes, and now Lydia. Each disappearance was staged differently. A swimmer, a fisherman, and now a girl in the woods. The variants suggested someone calculating the exact level of fear for each victim. Back at the station, once Lydia was secured in a patrol vehicle, Hart drove her back to the Harrow's Edge Police Department, carefully observing her reactions. The girl flinched at every turn, at every sound of sirens, as if expecting the predator to appear at any moment. In the interrogation room, Lydia sat on a chair, shivering. Hart knelt to speak at eye level. "Lydia, can you tell me what happened?" The girl's eyes filled with tears. He said he was watching. He made me stay quiet. I couldn't scream. I thought I'd never get out." Hart's voice was soft but firm. "Do you remember what he looked like?" Lydia shook her head. "No, always a hood. Always a mask." Riley frowned. "Mask? That complicates things." Hart leaned forward. "Did he say anything? Did he talk to you?" Lydia nodded slightly. He spoke to me. Calm. Not angry. Not yelling. Just instructing me. Like a teacher." Hart's stomach tightened. The predator wasn't reckless. He wasn't sloppy. Every abduction, every staged scene, every disappearance had been executed with control, precision, and an almost clinical detachment. The clues. Hart and Riley reviewed the camp's evidence while Lydia was placed in protective custody. The camp contained maps, several notebooks, and more personal items, belongings from previous victims. Hart flipped through one of the notebooks. Inside were handwritten notes, locations along Blackwood Lake, victim profiles, times, and instructions. Some pages were diagrams of boats, others sketches of the shoreline and forest paths. Riley pointed to one sketch. "Look at this. It matches Cedar Point." He's been mapping everything. Hart nodded grimly. This confirms it. The predator isn't impulsive. He's planning every disappearance down to the last detail. Another notebook contained audio device schematics, small microphones, recording devices, and instructions on how to plant them near victims. Hart's fingers traced the diagrams. He's been monitoring them, listening, controlling. Riley's voice dropped. He's not just a kidnapper. He's obsessive. He wants control over every aspect of the victim's experience. Hart's eyes darkened. And he's smart. That's why he hasn't been caught yet. He knows how to cover his tracks. He knows the woods, the lake, and the community. He's patient, and he's methodical. A pattern emerges. Over the next few hours, Hart and Riley pieced together the timeline. Samantha Reed vanished in the lake at dawn. Wilkes disappeared with his boat shortly after. Now Lydia had been found, huddled in the northern woods. Each abduction followed a different method, but all shared the same signature: isolation, manipulation, and control. Hart stared at the sketches and notes from the camp. He's not just abducting people, she said. He's creating a game. A series of disappearances that follow a deliberate path. And it's escalating. Riley shook his head. Escalating how? Hart pointed to a note in the notebook, marked with a red circle. Look here. It's a schedule. A list of dates, times, and locations. The next one, it's within the next 24 hours. Riley's jaw tightened. So he's going to strike again. Soon. Hart nodded grimly. And this time, if we don't act fast, someone else might not survive. The search intensifies. By evening, the entire northern region around Blackwood Lake was on high alert. Patrols, search teams, and volunteers combed the shoreline and surrounding woods. Drones circled overhead, cameras scanning for any sign of movement. Hart coordinated the efforts from the command vehicle. Maps and sketches from the Predator's notebooks were spread across the dashboard. Every possible path, every likely hideout, and every potential victim was accounted for. Riley joined her, voice low. We have to find him before the next victim disappears. But how do you catch someone who's always one step ahead? Hart's eyes never left the map. We predict his next move. We anticipate. And we set a trap. She paused, studying the lake in the distance. The fog now rolled back in, curling over the water like a living thing. It hid the paths, the inlets, the predator himself. Hart clenched her fists. The girl in the woods is safe, for now. But the game, it's just beginning. And somewhere beyond the fog, someone was watching, waiting, planning. The fog had returned to Blackwood Lake like a slow, suffocating tide. The northern woods were darker now, the trees looming like silent sentinels. Detective Eleanor Hart and Deputy Marcus Riley stood at the edge of a dirt road, staring at the outline of a cabin half hidden among the pines. This is it, Hart said, pointing. Based on Lydia's description and the sketches from the camp, this has to be his next hideout. Riley adjusted his flashlight, the beam cutting through the mist. Looks abandoned. Could he have left? Hart shook her head. Not yet. He's too organized. He wouldn't leave a hideout like this without clearing every trace, or moving the victim somewhere else. The cabin was small, weathered by time and elements. Its paint was peeling, the roof sagging in spots. Yet, everything about it felt deliberate. The path to the door was clear of undergrowth, the windows unobstructed, and a faint smell of smoke lingered in the air. Someone had been here recently. Entering the cabin, Hart signaled the tactical team to take positions around the perimeter. They moved silently, each officer checking windows, doors, and blind spots. Hart and Riley approached the front door carefully. Hart reached for the doorknob. On my count, she whispered. 3, 2, 1. She pushed. The door creaked, swinging open to reveal the interior. The cabin was staged. Everything inside appeared normal at first glance: a small kitchen, a table with chairs, a sofa, and a wood-burning stove. But Hart noticed the details the predator had meticulously placed. On the table, a single plate with untouched food. On the sofa, a folded blanket. And on the floor, a series of footprints in dust, footprints leading toward a back room. Riley crouched, examining the prints. Too clean. He's been moving carefully, deliberately leaving a trail. Hart nodded. And look, see that? She pointed to a chair turned toward the back room, as if someone had been waiting. The back room door was slightly ajar. Hart pushed it open slowly. Inside, the smell of damp earth mixed with something more metallic. She froze. A single bed, neatly made, sat in the center. But on it were personal items, a backpack, a pair of sneakers, and a notebook. Items belonging to previous victims. Riley's voice was low. His keeping trophies. Hart's stomach turned. And his escalating. The disappearances, the staged scenes, the trophies, it's all part of a ritual. He wants to relive the control he had over them. Evidence of the predator. Hart moved through the cabin, carefully documenting everything. On a small desk, she found maps of the surrounding area, with locations marked and dates annotated in neat handwriting. Riley examined a stack of notebooks beside the desk. More instructions, he said. He's keeping records of his victims, schedules, and hideouts. This isn't random. It's methodical, planned. Hart flipped through one of the notebooks. Inside were detailed diagrams of Blackwood Lake, the surrounding woods, and the cabins along its edge. Notes described how to lure victims, where to leave tracks, and even how to manipulate search teams. He's been planning this for months, Hart said grimly. He knows how we operate. He anticipates our moves. That's why we haven't caught him yet. Riley's brow furrowed. So how do we stop him before someone else ends up here? Hart looked around the cabin, noting the signs of careful preparation. Food hidden in containers, emergency exits cleared, and multiple paths leading into the woods. We anticipate. We plan. We cut off every exit. And we wait. The hidden room. Hart noticed a section of the cabin floor that looked slightly different. A panel that seemed to have been moved recently. She knelt, inspecting it. Riley, this floorboard. It's loose. Riley knelt beside her. You think he has a hidden compartment? Hart carefully lifted the panel. Beneath it was a small crawl space, just large enough for a person to hide. Inside were blankets, water bottles, and a journal. Hart pulled out the journal. The pages were filled with meticulous notes, dates, times, names, and detailed descriptions of victims' behavior. The handwriting was precise, almost clinical. Riley's face went pale. He's been tracking them, studying them. This isn't just abduction, it's obsession. Hart nodded. And look at this. She flipped to a page with photographs taped in. Some were grainy, taken from the woods, the lake, or inside cabins. Each photo showed victims at their most vulnerable, swimming, alone, unaware. Riley swallowed hard. He's documenting everything. He's watching them. And he's controlling them, psychologically. Hart's mind raced. The predator's control extended beyond the physical abduction. He manipulated their perception of reality, isolated them, and recorded every moment. Whoever he wasn't just violent. He was methodical, organized, and dangerous. A disturbing message. As Hart continued examining the hidden room, she noticed something strange. A note written on the wall in pencil, small but deliberate. They are all pieces of the story. Each move, each disappearance, it completes the puzzle. Watch closely. Learn. Obey. Riley read it aloud. He's sending a message. To who? Us? The victims. Hart's lips tightened. Maybe both. He wants control, and he wants acknowledgement. He's orchestrating this entire game, and every clue we find, every staged scene, it's part of his narrative. She took a deep breath. We have to be careful. He's clever. Every detail here, every staged item, every hidden compartment, is part of how he manipulates perception. We can't rush in and risk triggering his next move. Riley nodded. So we bait him. Hart's eyes narrowed. Exactly. But we have to think like him. Anticipate every step. Otherwise, we lose another victim. The trap is set. The detectives left the staged cabin with a plan forming in their minds. They would set up surveillance, block all exits, and track the predator's movements. Every path, every hidden compartment, every potential escape route had to be accounted for. Hart studied the maps and notes from the cabin as they drove back to the station. The predator's precision was unnerving. Each abduction followed a calculated path, each victim carefully chosen and monitored. And now, with Lydia safe but shaken, it was clear. The next victim could be anyone. She glanced out the window at the misty woods along Blackwood Lake. Somewhere in that forest, the predator was watching, waiting, and planning his next move. Hart's jaw set. We know his patterns. We know his methods. Now we just need to anticipate the next step and stop him before it's too late. The northern woods surrounding Blackwood Lake had grown darker than usual that night, shrouded in heavy fog and broken only by the flicker of searchlights from the police perimeter. Detective Eleanor Hart stood silently behind a line of trees, the cold biting through her jacket. Her eyes scanned the shadows, every rustle of leaves, every distant splash of water, setting her nerves on edge. "This is it," she whispered to Deputy Marcus Riley, who crouched beside her, flashlight and radio in hand. "Tonight, we watch. Tonight, we catch him." Riley nodded. The cabin, the camp, the lake, is predictable. He thinks in patterns. If he's here, he'll show himself. Hart's jaw tightened. She had studied the predator's movements, examined the staged cabin, and gone over Lydia's testimony countless times. She knew one thing for certain: he wasn't sloppy. He would strike when he felt in control, and tonight, he believed he could move unseen. Setting the trap. The police had blocked off all major access points around the northern woods. Surveillance cameras had been deployed along the shoreline and around Cedar Point, while a small tactical unit concealed themselves near the hidden trails the predator had used in previous abductions. Hart and Riley positioned themselves near a bend in the trail, overlooking the small clearing where Lydia had been found earlier. The clearing was still damp from the morning dew, the grass flattened in certain spots where someone had recently moved. Hart spoke softly into her radio. "Units A through D, hold positions. Anyone who moves past the clearing is our target. Keep your lights off. Don't alert him." Riley checked the drone feed. The overhead camera revealed only the fog-draped trees, but Hart knew that the predator could be watching them already, possibly monitoring their communications, possibly manipulating the situation from a distance. "He's here," she whispered. "I can feel it." Riley nodded, tension lining his face. "Then let's hope we're ready." First contact. Hours passed slowly. The fog thickened, muffling sound and reducing visibility to mere feet. Every snap of a twig made the officers tense. Hart's mind replayed Lydia's account, how the predator had spoken softly, calmly, instructing her with patience and control. She knew that tonight, his calm voice could be the only warning before disaster struck. Then, just past midnight, the first sign appeared. A shadow flickered between the trees, moving deliberately, silently. Hart signaled Riley and the team, and the tactical units held their positions, waiting. The shadow paused near the edge of the clearing. Hart's breath caught. Through the fog, she could just make out the figure of a man, hooded and careful. He didn't seem to notice the officers hidden in the trees, moving with the quiet precision of someone who knew exactly where he could and could not be seen. Riley whispered, "That's him. That's our guy." Hart nodded, her fingers tightening around her weapon. "Wait. Let him get close enough." The predator's move. The figure approached the clearing, crouching slightly as if checking the ground for evidence. Hart noticed he carried a small bag, the kind used to transport tools or other items. His movements were deliberate, calculated, every step designed to avoid detection and to control the environment around him. "He's not just wandering," Hart murmured. "He's setting something up." From the drone feed, Hart could see the glint of something metallic in the predator's hand. A trap, a recording device. She didn't know yet, but one thing was certain. He expected the area to be empty. Riley shifted, voice barely audible. "Do we wait, or do we move in?" Hart's eyes never left the figure. "We wait. He'll make the first mistake. That's when we act." The hidden observer. Suddenly, a second movement caught Hart's eye. A small figure darted behind a tree, observing the predator from a distance. Hart's stomach clenched. "That's new," she whispered. "Someone else is here, maybe another victim, maybe an accomplice." The figure stepped closer to the clearing, trying to remain hidden. Hart realized it was a young woman, shivering and trembling. She recognized her immediately, Lydia. The predator must not have realized she was nearby, possibly still traumatized but following the trail, drawn to the place where she had been found. Hart signaled the officers near Lydia. "Get her out, quietly. Keep her hidden until we have control of the predator." Riley moved swiftly, guiding Lydia behind the trees to safety. She trembled, her eyes wide, but whispered only, "Is here, is here." Hart's jaw clenched. "We've got him." The confrontation. The predator, unaware that Lydia had been removed from sight, continued his careful inspection of the clearing. Hart stepped from her cover, weapon raised but voice calm. "Stop right there," she commanded. The figure froze. Slowly, he turned, hood shadowing his face. Hart could see only glimpses of his eyes, cold, calculating, unyielding. Riley and the tactical team stepped out of their hiding spots, surrounding him. "You're surrounded. Don't move," Riley said firmly. For a long moment, the predator stood silently, calculating. Then, in a voice that was soft but commanding, he said, "You shouldn't have come here." Hart responded calmly, keeping her weapon steady. "It's over. You're done." The predator smiled faintly, almost amused. "Done? You don't understand. This is more than a game. It's a story. And every story has its pieces." Riley frowned. "Pieces? Victims aren't pieces, they are people." The predator's eyes glimmered. "To me, they are essential elements. Without them, the story is incomplete." Hart realized that reasoning with him would do nothing. This man didn't see people. He saw control, patterns, and power. The capture. The tactical team moved in swiftly. Hart and Riley flanked the predator, cornering him near the clearing. With a calculated move, they disabled the small bag he carried, revealing an assortment of recording devices and personal items from previous victims. "Hands behind your head," Hart commanded. The predator raised his hands slowly, a faint smirk on his face. "You caught me, this time." Riley cuffed him while Hart carefully collected the items. Every device, every note, every personal belonging told the story of the meticulous planning behind the abductions. The predator had orchestrated weeks, maybe months, of disappearances, using control and fear as his tools. Hart examined the man closely. He was average in height, thin, unassuming, a face that would never be remembered in a crowd, yet behind it hid a mind of extraordinary manipulation and danger. With the predator in custody, Lydia was brought back to the clearing. She ran into Hart's arms, trembling but safe. "You caught him," she whispered. Hart nodded. "Yes. He won't hurt anyone else tonight." Riley shook his head, surveying the fog-shrouded woods. But all of his victims, the ones before Lydia, they were part of his story. How many others are out there? Hart's expression hardened. "We'll find them. Every single one. He may be caught, but his planning, his obsession, it didn't start tonight. We have to follow the trail, use his own records against him." The team began cataloging every device, notebook, and photograph found in the predator's possession. Each item revealed a new piece of the story, a new method, a new potential victim. Hart knew the investigation was far from over. But for tonight, at least, the predator's control had ended. As the fog lifted slightly over Blackwood Lake, Hart took a deep breath. Somewhere in the woods, the echoes of fear still lingered, the remnants of the predator's game. And as long as there were pieces of his story left to uncover, the detectives knew that the lake would never feel safe again. The morning sun barely pierced the mist hanging over Blackwood Lake as Detective Eleanor Hart and Deputy Marcus Riley reviewed the contents recovered from the predator's cabin. The hooded man they had apprehended the night before, now formally identified as Gideon Markham, had left behind a trove of notebooks, photographs, and recording devices. Each item was a breadcrumb leading to his twisted mind. Hart spread the items across the table in the station's evidence room. Maps of Blackwood Lake, detailed schedules, and victim logs were stacked neatly. Each notebook was meticulously organized, with dates, times, and locations clearly annotated. Riley flipped through a journal. His almost obsessive. "Look at this. Every disappearance, every detail, every victim's movements, all recorded. He planned this down to the last second." Hart nodded grimly. "That's why he wasn't caught sooner. He's careful, deliberate. He anticipates responses from police, witnesses, even volunteers." Riley's voice dropped. "But patterns can be predicted. If we analyze all of this, maybe we can figure out his next move." Hart agreed. "Exactly. Let's do that." Mapping the abductions, the team began cross-referencing every victim with the predator's notes. Samantha Reed disappeared at the lake. Thomas Wilkes vanished with his boat. Lydia was found huddled in the northern woods. Each event had been staged differently, but Hart noticed similarities. Isolation. Each victim was lured or forced away from the public eye. Control. Gideon exerted psychological dominance, ensuring his victims were compliant. Observation. He monitored them closely, leaving minimal physical evidence but extensive documentation. Hart pointed to a wall map. See here. Samantha, Wilkes, Lydia, all locations align along the northern edge of the lake. If this is a pattern, he's moving progressively deeper into the woods. Riley frowned. So his next victim could be further inland. Hart traced a line with her finger. Exactly. He's escalating. He starts with the lakefront, then boats, then the forest. The cabin was a staging point. But he's planning further. Maybe a more secluded spot next. She circled another point on the map, a tiny inlet, difficult to access, heavily wooded. This spot, it hasn't been used yet. And based on the timing intervals between his previous abductions, someone could disappear there within hours. Riley's jaw tightened. So we've got to act fast. He's predictable, but he's smart. If we wait, it'll be too late. Studying the predator's psychology. Hart pulled a notebook from the pile. The handwriting was precise, clinical, almost obsessive. Notes included victim habits, responses to fear, preferred hiding spots, and even sketches of surveillance patterns. He's not just violent, Hart said, pointing at the notebook. He's strategic. He studies people, isolates them, and manipulates their perception. He doesn't just abduct. He constructs scenarios that make victims comply, almost willingly. Riley shivered. It's psychological torture, not just physical. Hart nodded. Exactly. And look here. She flipped to a page with time-stamped sequences of abductions. He allows intervals between disappearances, sometimes hours, sometimes days. It's part of the pattern. He's testing our response, seeing how quickly we react. Riley leaned closer. So his pattern is both predictable and manipulative. He's teaching us and controlling us at the same time. Hart's eyes narrowed. And that's the key. If we understand his timing, his locations, his method, we can anticipate the next move instead of reacting. Predicting the next move. Hart and Riley compiled the timeline. Samantha Reed, lakefront, early morning, vanished without a trace. Thomas Wilkes, boat, mid-morning, staged as a disappearance at sea. Lydia, northern woods, huddled behind a log, coerced but not physically harmed. Gaps, each event followed a calculated sequence, with the predator testing the environment, adjusting, and refining his method. Hart traced the timeline on a fresh map. His escalating in isolation. The first victim was visible, open lake. The second had some concealment, boat and water. The third, Lydia, full forest isolation. The next step will be complete enclosure, somewhere he can control completely. Riley's eyes widened. A cabin? Or maybe an abandoned house, a shed, or worse. Hart's jaw set. Exactly. He wants maximum control, minimal exposure. And based on the predator's cycle, we're running out of time. He's already planned his next move, and we need to cut him off before he executes it. Reviewing evidence. The team went through Gideon's devices and photographs again. Each victim was meticulously recorded, often in motion, sometimes during daily routines. Gideon's obsession with observation and control was clear. He wasn't just taking victims, he was documenting fear, compliance, and reaction. Riley held up a small audio recorder. He's been listening to conversations, monitoring panic, keeping audio logs. He's obsessive. This isn't just about abduction, it's about control and domination. Hart studied a photograph taped into a notebook. It showed Lydia, hidden behind a tree, looking terrified. Look at her posture. Look at her hands. This isn't random. He wants victims to feel helpless, compliant, and is studying every response to refine his method. Riley swallowed hard. So is learning from his victims. Each disappearance makes him more effective. Hart nodded. And that's why we need to anticipate, not react. If we let him continue, more victims, more refinement, he'll be unstoppable. Planning the intercept. Hart gathered the tactical team in the evidence room. Using the notebooks, maps, and timestamps, They identified several high-probability locations for the next abduction. The next target area, Hart explained, pointing to the map, is the southeastern inlet. Remote, heavily wooded, easy to access by foot or boat. The predator hasn't used it yet. If he follows his pattern, someone will be taken there within 24 hours. Riley grimaced. That's tight. How do we intercept without alerting him? Hart outlined the plan. Surveillance, drones and thermal cameras to monitor the inlet. Ground units, officers concealed along the likely paths to intercept the predator. Victim tracking, coordinate with locals to identify anyone in the area who may be at risk. Dicko, use bait to draw him into a monitored area, perhaps an unoccupied boat or a staged campsite. We anticipate his pattern, exploit his obsession with control, and cut off all escape routes, Hart concluded. Riley nodded. We trap him using his own methods against him. A race against time. As night fell over Blackwood Lake, the team mobilized. Patrols took position, drones hovered silently above, and hidden cameras scanned the dark woods. The predator's pattern suggested he would strike again soon. Hart knew that understanding his cycle was key, not just to intercept the next victim, but to unravel the entire operation. Hart's mind replayed Lydia's words, the calm, instructive voice, the sense of inevitability, the way the predator controlled her movements. That voice would return, and when it did, they had to be ready. Every move he makes, Hart whispered to Riley, we anticipate. Every pattern, every step, every psychological tactic, we've studied it. Tonight, we stop him before he takes another person. Riley checked his flashlight and radio one last time. Then let's do it. The pattern ends tonight. Hart looked toward the lake, where the fog curled over the water, hiding both danger and opportunity. Somewhere in that shadow, Gideon Markham, the predator, was planning his next move, and it was up to them to predict it before it was too late. The fog rolled across Blackwood Lake like a living thing, curling over the water and seeping into the northern woods. Detective Eleanor Hart and Deputy Marcus Riley stood silently in the command vehicle, eyes glued to a series of monitors. The predator, Gideon Markham, was still loose, though his last hideout had been discovered. His obsession with control and careful planning meant he could strike again at any moment. Hart tapped her finger on a map of the northern inlets. If we want to catch him, we have to play his game. His predictable, but his clever. We can't just wait, we have to draw him out. Riley leaned over, scrutinizing the drone feed. You're talking about bait. But how do we make him bite without risking another victim? Hart's eyes darkened. We use what he obsesses over. Control, observation, compliance. Something he thinks he can manipulate. And we watch every move. Choosing the right bait. The team brainstormed potential lures. At first, they considered leaving an empty boat along the lake, but Hart shook her head. Too obvious. He's been surveilling the area for weeks. He'll know it's a trap. Riley frowned. Then what? We can't risk a human decoy. Hart's mind raced. Then she remembered Lydia's testimony, her terror, her compliance, her near escape. We use a decoy that represents control without putting anyone at risk, Hart said. A mannequin, clothing arranged as if someone is present, personal items he obsesses over. Riley's eyes widened. So he thinks he's abducting someone, but it's just a setup. Hart nodded. Exactly. His obsession with observation will draw him in. He'll believe he's manipulating a victim, but we'll be watching, waiting for him to make a move. The team prepared the decoy meticulously, a jacket, backpack, shoes, and a small blanket arranged near a secluded inlet where Gideon's pattern suggested he might strike next. Cameras, drones, and hidden microphones were positioned around the area to capture every action. Waiting in the shadows. As night fell, Hart, Riley, and the tactical team hid along the tree line, silent and tense. Every snap of a twig, every whisper of wind through the branches made Hart's race. Hart whispered into her radio, all units, hold positions. Eyes on the decoy. Any movement toward it is our target. Wait for my signal. Riley scanned the clearing through his thermal scope. Nothing yet. It's like the forest is holding its breath. Hours passed, each minute stretching longer than the last. Hart thought of Lydia, of Samantha, of Wilkes. Every second wasted increased the danger for anyone else Gideon might have planned to abduct. Then, around 2:15 a.m., a shadow appeared, low and deliberate, moving along the tree line. Hart's heart skipped a beat. "That's him," she whispered. The figure was cautious but purposeful, stepping silently over roots and brush, eyes locked on the deco. Riley exhaled slowly. "He's biting. Just like we predicted." The predator approaches. Gideon Markham crept closer, carrying a small bag. His movements were careful, controlled, almost ritualistic. He crouched near the deco, inspecting it as if measuring its reactions. Hart could see him tilt his head, examining every angle, every detail. "He's checking for signs of life," Hart said softly. "Obsessive, meticulous. This is our chance." Through hidden microphones, they heard his voice, soft and calm, move slowly. "Watch. Control. Don't let them escape. They obey, eventually." Riley swallowed hard. "He's speaking to it as if it's a victim." Hart nodded. "Exactly. He thinks he's manipulating someone. That's why he's here. He can't resist. This is what he obsesses over: control, observation, compliance." The predator carefully placed a small recording device near the decoy, crouched to observe it, and adjusted the backpack as if ensuring the victim was positioned correctly. Every move, every adjustment, revealed his methodical nature. The capture plan. Hart signaled the tactical team via radio. "Positions confirmed. Ready on my mark." The officers held their weapons low but ready. Drones hovered above, cameras streaming live feeds. Every potential escape route was covered. Hart knew Gideon's obsession with perfection would make him predictable. He would linger, adjust, check, ensure control. "Wait for him to fully commit," Hart instructed. "The moment he crosses the line, we move." The predator leaned over the decoy, inspecting it from every angle, moving closer and closer. Hart's eyes narrowed. She counted internally, step by step, inch by inch. He was about to fully engage, unaware of the trap closing around him. Closing the net. Finally, Gideon reached toward the decoy, intent on manipulating it. Hart gave the signal. "Move in," she commanded. Officers emerged from their hiding positions, surrounding him from all sides. Hart and Riley stepped forward, weapons raised, voices commanding, "Stop! Hands behind your head." Gideon froze, the smirk on his face vanishing as he realized he had been outmaneuvered. For a moment, there was a tense silence, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant sound of water lapping against the shore. "You think you can control this?" Hart demanded. "It's over, Gideon. You're done." He stared at them, calm but calculating. Control is never over. The pieces, they remain. And the story continues. Riley moved in swiftly, securing Gideon with handcuffs. The story ends tonight. No more victims. Evidence secured. The team collected Gideon's bag, discovering more recording devices, victim belongings, and notebooks. Each item was evidence of his obsession, his pattern, his meticulous planning. They had finally captured not only the man but the tools of his manipulations. Hart studied Gideon closely. His calm, clinical demeanor was chilling, but beneath it was a mind obsessed with control, observation, and the compulsion to manipulate. Every victim had been a piece in his story, every disappearance a calculated step in a larger game. Riley shook his head. "We've got him, but how many others are out there? How many pieces did he move before tonight?" Hart didn't answer immediately. She studied the surrounding woods, the fog still curling around the trees. "We follow every lead, every note, every pattern. We find them all. That's the only way to truly end this." By dawn, Gideon Markham was in custody, transported to a secure facility. Lydia, Samantha's family, and Wilkes' friends were informed of his capture. Relief mixed with lingering fear. How many more had suffered under his control? Hart and Riley reviewed the predator's notebooks again, each page a blueprint of abductions, control, and psychological manipulation. They mapped out potential past locations, hidden sites, and unreported disappearances. It was clear, this man had been active for months, possibly years. Hart exhaled, her mind racing. Capturing him is just the first step. Understanding his methods, following the pattern, and finding every victim, that's the real work. Riley nodded. "We've got the pieces. Now we have to assemble the puzzle before it's too late for anyone else." Hart looked toward Blackwood Lake, the mist lifting in the early morning light. Somewhere beyond the fog, the echoes of Gideon's calculated terror remained. But for the first time in weeks, there was hope, a chance to finally bring closure to those he had victimized. The first light of dawn painted the northern woods around Blackwood Lake in pale gold, but for Detective Eleanor Hart, there was little comfort. The capture of Gideon Markham had been a success, but it was only the beginning. His meticulous notebooks and recordings suggested the horror he had wrought extended far beyond the victims they had already discovered. Hart sat in the evidence room, maps, photographs, and journals spread before her. Deputy Marcus Riley entered, carrying a fresh cup of coffee, his expression grim. "They're asking questions," Riley said quietly. "Families, neighbors, the press." Hart didn't look up. "Let them ask. Right now, we have to focus on the hidden victims. Gideon's pattern tells us they are out there, somewhere, waiting." Riley frowned. "Do we even know how many?" Hart shook her head. "Not yet, but we can find out. His notebooks, recordings, and maps give us clues, and we follow every one." Tracing the predator's history, Gideon's journals were exhaustive. Every abduction, every hiding place, every observation had been carefully documented. Dates, locations, times, and even environmental conditions were recorded. Hart and Riley spent hours piecing together the timeline. Samantha Reed, Thomas Wilkes, and Lydia were only the most recent victims, but the notes referenced others, names she didn't recognize, locations that weren't yet linked to known disappearances. "He's been active for months," Hart muttered, flipping through a notebook. "Maybe years. Each disappearance follows the same pattern: isolate, control, document, release, or hide." Riley leaned over the map. "If we overlay his known locations with reports of missing persons, we might find matches." Hart nodded. "Exactly. But we have to move quickly. Every site we investigate is another opportunity to rescue someone still alive, or at least recover evidence." The first hidden site. The team began with a site marked in Gideon's journal as Camp 4. It was a remote clearing deep in the northern woods, accessible only by a narrow, overgrown trail. Hart led the way, Riley at her side, as the tactical team fanned out to cover potential exits. The clearing was chillingly quiet. The remains of a small campfire were still visible, though long cold. Blankets, containers, and a few scattered personal items suggested recent use. Hart's stomach turned as she recognized some of the items, a backpack that matched the description of one missing from a local teenager. Riley knelt beside a tarp covering a small depression in the ground. Could be a hiding spot, or worse. Hart gently lifted the tarp. Beneath it were carefully stored personal items, clothing, notebooks, and photographs. Nothing alive, but enough to confirm that Gideon had been here and used the site to isolate victims. "He's keeping souvenirs," Hart said grimly. "Not just trophies, but a record. Proof that he controlled them." Riley's voice was low. "Every site will be like this, a catalog of his victims." Hart nodded. "And we'll find them all." The search expands. Using Gideon's journals, the detectives traced multiple locations, abandoned cabins, hidden clearings, and secluded lake inlets. Each site revealed more items: shoes, personal effects, notebooks with notes, and small recording devices. Some sites contained subtle clues that a victim had been present but escaped or been released. A ripped jacket here, a flattened blanket there, traces of desperation, fear, and survival. Hart realized the predator's methods had allowed some victims to survive, but most had been controlled so completely that they left no obvious trace. Riley studied a set of coordinates. "This one's in the eastern woods, near the inlet he hasn't used yet. Could someone still be alive there?" Hart considered it. Possibly. But if he's moved them, we have to follow every note, every map, every recorded instruction to track them. A surviving victim. At one site, deep in the forest, Hart and Riley found a small cabin marked as Camp 7 in Gideon's journals. The cabin door was locked, but the team forced entry. Inside, a young woman sat huddled in the corner, trembling, covered in dirt and scratches. Hart dropped to her knees. "You're safe now. We're the police. You're safe." The woman's eyes widened. I thought he'd come back. I thought I was going to die." Riley handed her a blanket. "It's over. You're safe." Hart noticed bruises along the woman's wrists and arms, signs of restraint. "What's your name?" she asked softly. "Amelia," the woman whispered. He watched me. Told me to stay quiet. I couldn't scream. I didn't want him to hurt me." Hart's mind raced. This was a survivor, someone who could provide first-hand insight into Gideon's methods. "Amelia, did he say anything? Did he talk to you?" She nodded slightly. "Always calm. Always instructing, like a teacher. He wanted me to do exactly what he said." Hart exchanged a glance with Riley. "That matches the pattern. We've seen it before with Lydia. His control is psychological, precise, calculated. Connecting the dots." With Amelia's testimony, the detectives began to connect the dots across multiple disappearances. Gideon's sites formed a network, a carefully maintained system of isolation points, surveillance, and hiding spots. Each location reinforced his pattern. He took control, observed, documented, and sometimes allowed victims to remain for days before moving them or abandoning the site. Hart studied the maps and journals. These sites aren't random. Each one leads to the next. Each site teaches him something about how victims respond, how law enforcement reacts, how the environment can be manipulated. Riley frowned. "So each disappearance is a lesson for him." Hart nodded. "Exactly. And each victim is a piece of his story. Some survive. Some don't. But every piece is part of the pattern we have to understand if we're going to stop him completely." The scale of the crime. As the team uncovered more hidden sites, the scale of Gideon's crimes became horrifyingly clear. Dozens of items were recovered: clothing, shoes, personal journals, photographs, and recording devices. While some victims had escaped or been released, others were likely lost to the predator's obsession with control. Hart compiled a master map, linking every site, every victim, every recovered item. The predator's pattern emerged like a twisted web, each abduction, each site, each observation feeding into the next. Riley studied the map. "This is massive. He's been doing this for years. Who knows how many people never made it back?" Hart's expression hardened. "We'll find out. Every site, every note, every device. We follow the pattern, and we bring closure to everyone he's victimized." Preparing for the final step. With the network of hidden victims partially mapped, Hart knew the next phase was critical. The predator's pattern suggested more sites, more victims, and possibly someone still alive at this very moment. The investigation could not slow. They had to anticipate his next move before another person disappeared. Hart addressed the team. "We've uncovered the network, and we have survivors to guide us. But we're not done. We follow every trail, every pattern, every note. We find every hidden victim. And we end this." Riley nodded. "We've got the tools, the information, and now survivors to guide us. We can do it." Hart looked toward the forest, the morning mist lifting, revealing the dense woodland. Somewhere within it, Gideon's legacy of fear lingered. But with every hidden victim they uncovered, they reclaimed a piece of his control, a piece of hope, a piece of justice. The work was far from over, but for the first time, Hart felt they were closing in. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon, and Blackwood Lake was already shrouded in fog. Detective Eleanor Hart stood with Deputy Marcus Riley and the tactical team at the edge of the northern woods, reviewing the final operation plan. Gideon Markham, the predator responsible for a series of abductions and psychological manipulation, had been apprehended once before, but evidence suggested he still had accomplices or hidden locations where victims might be in imminent danger. Tonight, they would lay the final trap. Hart's gaze swept over the team. Everyone was tense but focused. "This is it," she said quietly. "We've studied his pattern, traced his network of sites, and recovered as many victims as possible. But there are still locations unaccounted for. Tonight, we intercept him before he can strike again." Riley checked his equipment. "We've set up drones, hidden cameras, and decoys at the high-probability areas. He won't know what's waiting for him." Hart nodded. "Good. Timing will be critical. Remember, he's meticulous. One wrong move, and the trap could fail. We follow the pattern, anticipate his obsession, and act decisively." Deploying the trap, the team moved silently, fanning out across the northern inlet, a remote clearing by the lake where Gideon's past patterns indicated he might strike next. A decoy had been prepared, a jacket, backpack, and a blanket carefully arranged near the water's edge, mimicking a vulnerable victim. Hidden cameras and microphones captured every angle, while officers concealed themselves in the surrounding trees. Hart and Riley took position behind a large oak tree overlooking the clearing. The mist clung to the ground, masking movement, and the only sounds were the gentle lapping of water and distant calls of nocturnal birds. Riley whispered, "This is eerily quiet, too quiet." Hart's eyes narrowed. "That's when they strike. Remember Lydia and Amelia. The predator waits for the moment when his prey seems alone, when he believes he has control. That's when we catch him." The team remained still, every nerve on edge, waiting for the predator to appear. The first signs. Hours passed with nothing but the rustle of leaves and the occasional splash of water. Hart's grip on her weapon tightened as she scanned the clearing. Then, just past midnight, movement appeared, a shadow slipping silently through the fog. Riley's whisper was tense. "There, he's coming." Through the mist, they saw the figure approach the decoy, hooded and careful, moving with the same deliberate precision that had characterized Gideon's past abductions. Hart recognized the rhythm, careful inspection, measuring the environment, calculating risk. Every movement spoke of a man obsessed with control. "He's inspecting the victim," Hart murmured. "Exactly as we predicted. He thinks he can manipulate it. That's our opening." Riley's thermal scope revealed him crouching, placing a small recording device near the decoy, and tilting his head to observe it. Every motion was deliberate, ritualistic. Hart whispered, "Wait, let him fully engage." Closing the net, the officers remained perfectly still, holding their positions until the predator had fully approached the decoy. Then, Hart gave the signal. "Move in." Hidden officers emerged from the shadows, surrounding him from all sides. Hart and Riley stepped forward, weapons raised and voices commanding, "Stop! Hands behind your head." The predator froze, panic flashing in his eyes for the first time. You can't," he stammered, the smirk that had haunted victims now gone. Hart's voice was steady. "It's over, Gideon. No more victims, no more games. You're done." Riley cuffed him while Hart carefully collected the recording devices and notes. Each item told the story of obsession, control, and meticulous planning. The predator's tools of terror were finally in the hands of law enforcement. Discovering the remaining victims. Once Gideon was secured, Hart and the tactical team began searching the surrounding area, following clues from the decoy site and his past patterns. They discovered 2 hidden compartments in the woods, small shelters where victims had been kept, monitored, and psychologically manipulated. The survivors, shaken, trembling, and frightened, were guided out of their hiding spots. Hart knelt beside one young man, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. "You're safe now," she said softly. "You're out of danger." Another survivor, a teenage girl, whispered, I thought I'd never get out." He watched everything. Riley's jaw tightened. He controlled them completely, mentally, physically, emotionally. It's hard to even imagine what they went through. Hart's expression hardened. "And that's why we catch him. Not just for the survivors, but for every victim who couldn't escape. Every piece of his pattern leads to someone he's harmed." Analyzing the predator. Back at the command vehicle, Hart reviewed Gideon's notes and devices one last time. His obsession with order, control, and psychological domination was evident on every page, in every recording. He had catalogued every movement of his victims, every reaction to fear, every response to instruction. Riley observed, voice low. His methodical, almost clinical. "But what scares me is how he studies people, like they are part of an experiment." Hart nodded. "Exactly. He didn't just abduct. They were specimens in his study of control, and his network of hidden sites ensured he could manipulate without consequence." Riley frowned. "So tonight, capturing him is just the first step. We still have to process every site, recover every item, and make sure no one else is at risk." Hart's jaw set. "We follow the pattern to the end. Every site, every note, every recording, until every piece of his story is uncovered." Securing justice. By sunrise, Gideon Markham was transported to a secure facility, the evidence carefully catalogued and sealed. Hart and Riley debriefed the tactical team, reviewing every move, every recovered item, and every survivor's statement. The operation had been a success, but Hart knew the work wasn't over. The network of hidden victims, the psychological trauma, and the meticulous planning meant they still had to uncover the full extent of Gideon's crimes. Riley glanced at the lake. It's quiet now, too quiet. Do you think there's anyone we missed? Hart studied the dense northern woods. Possibly, but we've trapped the predator, dismantled his network, and recovered the survivors we could. Now we track every remaining site and bring closure to those still affected. She exhaled, glancing at the survivors being escorted to safety. For the first time, hope is returning. And for the first time in months, Blackwood Lake is finally safe, at least for now. The predator's legacy. Even in custody, Gideon remained calm, detached, analyzing everything around him with cold precision. His obsession with control and observation had defined his crimes, and even behind bars, he seemed to believe he was still orchestrating something beyond reach. Hart studied him from across the room. Every note, every recording, every sight, it's all part of his mind. But we caught him. And now, it's our job to make sure every piece of that mind is understood, documented, and neutralized. Riley placed a hand on her shoulder. We've done everything we can. The final trap worked. His court. Hart nodded slowly, a mix of relief and determination in her eyes. Yes, but the work to uncover his pattern fully isn't over. For every hidden victim, we bring justice. And for every survivor, we offer closure. That's how we end his story, for real. The sun rose higher over Blackwood Lake, piercing the morning mist, casting light on the forest and the water. It was the first time in weeks that Hart felt a sense of resolution, but also the weight of the journey ahead. Gideon Markham was behind bars, but the shadows of his crimes lingered. And Hart knew that uncovering the predator's pattern completely would take every ounce of skill, patience, and resolve the detectives possessed. The early morning sun glinted off Blackwood Lake, casting a pale golden shimmer across the misty water. For Detective Eleanor Hart, the serenity of the scene was a stark contrast to the months of terror and investigation she had endured. The predator, Gideon Markham, had been captured, his network of hidden victims partially uncovered, but the final step remained, unraveling the full scale of his crimes and bringing complete closure to those he had terrorized. Hart stood in the command center, surrounded by maps, photographs, and notebooks recovered from Gideon's lairs. Every piece of evidence represented a victim, a moment of fear, and a calculated move in the predator's pattern. Deputy Marcus Riley entered, his face grim. "Morning," he said quietly. "Ready for the reckoning?" Hart looked up, her eyes steely. "We have to be. This is the final phase. Every site, every note, every recording, we follow them all. No stone unturned, no victim left behind." Revisiting the network, Gideon's notebooks had revealed a labyrinth of hidden locations, abandoned cabins, forest clearings, lake inlets, and concealed shelters. Each site had been designed for control, observation, and manipulation. Some victims had escaped, others had been left behind, abandoned in isolation, and some had been kept as trophies in his meticulous collection. Hart and Riley divided the sites among tactical teams, each with precise coordinates and timelines based on Gideon's own recordings. Every step was calculated, every movement designed to minimize risk to surviving victims while maximizing the chances of uncovering evidence. "The pattern is consistent," Hart said as they reviewed the master map. He escalated gradually: lakefront, boat, forest, cabins, isolated shelters. Each location is a lesson in control, and each victim is a piece of his story. If we follow the sequence, we can anticipate the next, or final, hidden sites. Riley frowned. Some sites could still have survivors. Some could be empty, or worse. Hart's jaw tightened. Then we move cautiously but decisively. The reckoning begins now. The first discovery. The first site was an abandoned cabin deep in the northern woods. Tactical teams approached quietly, scanning with thermal cameras and motion sensors. Hart entered the cabin, her flashlight cutting through darkness. Inside, she found evidence of recent occupancy, blankets arranged on the floor, empty food containers, and personal items that didn't belong to Gideon. A young man sat huddled in the corner, eyes wide with fear. Hart knelt beside him. "You're safe now. We're the police. You're out of danger." The young man trembled. I thought I'd never get out. He watches everything. Riley helped him to his feet. He's behind bars now. You're safe. Hart took note of the items in the cabin. Gideon had meticulously documented each victim's behaviors, responses, and vulnerabilities. Every site offered insight into his methods. Every recovered item was a puzzle piece of his calculated terror, piecing together the pattern. As the day progressed, Hart and Riley moved from site to site. Each location revealed more victims, some alive, some left as evidence of Gideon's obsession. They recovered journals, recording devices, photographs, and personal belongings meticulously catalogued by the predator. Amelia and Lydia, survivors from previous encounters, guided the teams through the network, identifying locations based on Gideon's instructions and patterns. Hart realized that the predator's obsession had become his undoing. His need to document, to control, to predict, had created a trail that ultimately led to his capture and the revelation of his crimes. Riley studied a recovered journal. He was obsessed with documenting fear, control, and compliance. Every victim, every response, it was like an experiment to him. Hart nodded. And that's why we have to follow every lead. Every note, every map, every recording tells a story. And now, we're going to finish that story. The final sites. By evening, the team arrived at the most remote and heavily concealed locations, places where Gideon had kept his most vulnerable victims. The woods were dense, the air heavy with anticipation. Hart's flashlight illuminated the remains of makeshift shelters, carefully camouflaged by foliage. In one clearing, they discovered a hidden underground compartment. Inside, a young woman crouched, shaking, covered in dirt and fear. Hart reached out gently. "It's over. You're safe now." The woman's eyes welled with tears. I thought I'd never get out. He never let me leave." Riley placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're free. He won't touch you again." Each site revealed the predator's meticulous planning, the psychological manipulation, and the tools he had used to maintain control. Yet with each discovery, Hart felt a growing sense of closure, not just for the survivors, but for herself and the entire investigative team. Confronting the predator. Back at the secure facility, Hart and Riley confronted Gideon with the extent of the recovered network. He remained unnervingly calm, his eyes cold and calculating, yet something flickered, a hint of unease, as Hart laid out the evidence. "We've recovered everything," Hart said, spreading the maps and journals across the table. "Every hidden site, every recording, every victim you controlled, it's all documented. The reckoning is here." Gideon's voice was quiet but sharp. "You can't understand it. You'll never understand the story. Every piece was essential. Control, observation, perfection." Hart's voice hardened. "Control ends tonight, Gideon. Your pattern is broken. The victims are safe. Your network is exposed. You're done." Riley added, "Every action, every location, every attempt at control, it's all over. There's nowhere else to hide, no one else to manipulate." The predator's eyes narrowed, but the faint smirk that had haunted Hart's mind vanished. For the first time, Gideon realized he had lost. His obsession, his careful planning, his psychological domination, all rendered powerless by the detective's determination. Unraveling the legacy. In the days following Gideon's capture, Hart and Riley oversaw the cataloging of every recovered site, victim testimony, and piece of evidence. Families were reunited with survivors, personal belongings were returned, and the full scope of Gideon's crimes was documented for prosecution. Amelia, Lydia, and other survivors were given support and protection, their testimonies forming a crucial part of the case. Each recovered victim represented a victory, a piece of the predator's story dismantled and exposed. Riley looked over the final map of recovered sites. It's staggering, all the work he did, all the control he exerted. Hart nodded, her eyes somber. "Yes, but it's also proof that we can fight back. Every pattern can be broken. Every network can be uncovered. And every survivor can find justice." Closure. The sun rose higher over Blackwood Lake, the mist finally lifting to reveal calm waters and peaceful woods. For Hart, the weight of months of investigation and terror finally began to lift. Gideon Markham's reign of psychological and physical terror had ended. The predator's network was dismantled, and every hidden victim had been discovered or accounted for. Hart stood at the edge of the lake, watching the sunlight dance across the water. Riley joined her, handing her a cup of coffee. "We did it," he said quietly. Hart exhaled, a mix of exhaustion and relief in her voice. "Yes, but it's more than that. We uncovered his methods, saved the survivors, and brought closure to everyone affected. That's the real victory." Riley nodded. "And Blackwood Lake, it can finally start to heal." Hart's gaze lingered on the tranquil water, the trees swaying gently in the morning breeze. "Yes," she said softly, "and so can the people. The reckoning is complete. The predator was behind bars, his network dismantled, and his victims freed." For Detective Eleanor Hart, the story of terror had reached its end, but the lessons of vigilance, patience, and the careful reading of patterns would stay with her forever. Blackwood Lake was quiet now, but the echoes of the predator's obsession would never be forgotten, and neither would the courage and determination of those who ensured that justice was finally served.